This is an interview with Mr. Allan Booth in his home at 48 Connection Street, Newport, Rhode Island. It will be concerned with Mr. Booth's life history and is part of the Newport Historical Society's Oral History Project. The interviewer is Beth Everett, the date June 11, 1984. Mr. Booth, do you consent to have this conversation taped?
Surely.
Mr. Booth, where were you born?
I was born in Newport, Rhode Island.
In a hospital? Home?
No, at home, I believe.
Where was that?
Well, at the time, it was on Roseneath Avenue.
Roseneath. And what part of section is that?
That's down here in the 4th Ward.
This is in the,
At an early age, we moved to Lawrence Avenue. My father was the head gardener for James L. Van Allen.
Oh, I see.
And
now, is Lawrence Avenue also in the 4th Ward?
yeah, well, yes, 4th Ward, 3rd voting district.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me who your parents were. Who was your father?
My father was John A. Booth, and he too was born here in Newport.
Oh, and what, also in this area?
Yes, the Booth homestead is on Roseneath Avenue.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. And what about your mother? Where was she born?
She was born here in Newport. I believe the family at the time, I was told, lived on West Street.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was her name?
her name was Cora Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
Her maiden name.
Was that a family who had been in Newport for a while?
Yes. Her mother's people, were named Weaver. They came from England on the ship, I believe it was called the Lion. It was the second ship that came after the Mayflower.
Is that so? Very interesting. Was it a big family?
Yes. I believe in my mother's family there were 9. And my father's family, 6.
That's pretty good. Well, families were big in those days.
Yes.
Well, what about your father's family? When did they arrive in Newport?
My father's family were both born in England and immigrated here. I don't know what the year was, but in the early 1800s, something like that.
Well, do you know why they came here?
No, I think Grandfather Booth had served in the army, and then he was a fruit grower, and they had a range of glass over here, and they raised fruit, and grapes particularly, and perhaps that's what brought them here. I don't know.
Well, was your grandfather Booth a gardener or a horticulturist? What did he do?
Yes, he was. He was a mostly, I suppose you'd call it truck garden now, and with the greenhouses, with the fruit and early vegetables, things like that, out of season type of thing.
Were those his own greenhouses, or did he work for someone else?
No, they were his own greenhouse. He built himself.
Here in the Newport area?
Yes, in Roseneath Avenue.
Are those gardens still there?
No, the homestead is, but where the greenhouses were, that's been built over as homes on that piece of property now.
Oh, you mentioned the homestead. Is any of the family still living in it?
Yes, my cousin Gordon owns it now, and he and his wife still live there.
So it's quite an old house.
Yes, quite an old house.
Well, now your grandfather Booth, you say, was a gardener. Did he teach your father any of his business or profession? Or?
Well, I think so. Teaching, when you grow up with the business, you just learn it. I don't, naturally you're taught the correct way of doing things, but as for formal schooling, no, you just grow with it.
You just learned at home.
Yeah.
And he helped his father in the gardening that he was doing.
In the garden, in the greenhouses. And then I was perhaps 5 or 6 months old when my father went to work for J.L. Van Allen, and we lived on the place. My father was there for 35 years.
Oh, now you say the Van Allen estate. Is that the one that burned a few years ago?
No, that the property is now owned by Sal Regina College.
Oh, it's over...
it's on Oka Point.
Oh, I see. Now, which building is that?
It's the one with the high gray granite wall around it.
That's not the main building.
No. It's just diagonally across from the main building.
On Oka Point Avenue?
Oka Point Avenue.
And is there a corner street there too that borders?
It's bounded by Oka Point, Lawrence, Leroy Avenue, and Shepherd Avenue.
And it was all that big area, the Van Allen estate.
And we lived between Leroy and Webster.
I see.
Family cottage and the greenhouses were there. They've since all disappeared. The house is still there, but the greenhouses are gone.
Well, you say the family cottage. Did that belong to the estate, or was that your own?
No, it belonged to the estate.
By the estate. Yeah. Now you say that you were just a baby when your father took that job. So you lived there for a good many years of your life, I guess.
I lived there until the time I went in the Army, and I was 40, 41, somewhere in there. And
so that's where you grew up.
Probably 24 years old at the time.
Did your father do anything, did he have time to do anything around the house, helping the family, your mother, with things that sort of indoor chores, or was he just too busy with his gardening?
No, my father was not a houseman. Because he had 6 or 8 men working for him, but any time my mother wanted painting done or something, he'd just send one of the men up to do it.
Oh, he was lucky he had someone like that, wasn't he? Well, did your mother mind? She had how many children?
5. 4 boys and 1 girl.
Only 1 girl. Well, did she cope all right? Did she manage to
Oh, yes.
do all that
we
work?
all got fed and clothed and...
Kept her busy, though.
Yes, sure did.
Well, who were your brothers and sisters? Tell me their names.
Well, my oldest brother is Alfred Royal Booth. He goes A.R. Booth, or Royal, we call him.
Does he live in Middletown?
No, he lives in Worcester, outside of Worcester, Auburn, Mass. And my sister was second oldest. She was Grace Thalmer, and we all called her Thalmer. And the next in line was Clifford, John Clifford. We called him Clifford.
Use the second name.
Yeah. And then me, and I have no middle name.
Oh, well, I've wondered because you didn't give me one.
And then my younger brother, Howard T., because we always called him Howard.
He was the exception. Well, how did you all get along together? Were you pretty good friends as children?
Oh yes, even to this day, we have no family squabbles.
Isn't that nice? Was there pretty strong discipline in the family, or were you treated with gentleness, or how did it go?
I would say it wasn't strong discipline. There was a lot of guidance, but no, we were treated pretty well with, I guess, respect or freedom, given us our freedom. And, as I say, there was a few guidelines, or you get the back of your hand. And something like that.
Was that usually from your father or your mother?
No, just my father.
Your mother didn't do that kind of thing.
No.
Well, where did you children play? Now, you were in the estate area, but you were in close, so there must have been children around you.
Yes, there were neighboring children. We were pretty much alone, but we went to Carey School, which was, between Narragansett Avenue and Carey Street. And most of our friends were around here, and we played, of course, in Morton Park. Or my brother Howard was more into sports than I was. He played baseball and things like that. And during the winter, we went down to the Army Pond skating.
Sure.
And
that was a big sport in early days. I guess we don't have much cold weather for it anymore.
I don't think the winters aren't as great or as cool.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I remember cutting ice, but now I don't think you could cut ice anywhere on the island.
Where do they cut the ice? In Almy Pond?
No, and they cut ice on the Lily Pond, and they cut ice on the big pond down there.
Is that so? And stored it for summer?
Yes.
And sawdust or whatever?
Well, there was a big ice house at the top of Wellington Avenue in those days.
Oh, is that? Did it?
Red brick building.
Did it last all summer long?
As far as I know, it did.
That seems so surprising when we have such comparatively warm winters now, and you usually can't even skate. Well, you say you weren't much interested in sports. Well, what sort of things did you like to do?
Oh, it's sports. I mean, we all had bicycles, and during the winter it was ice skating or skiing, something like that.
Oh, you skied too?
We skied.
Where did you ski?
Well, in those days, as young kids at the Morton Park, or over in the hills, the Lily Pond. There was no housing there then.
You where did you get your skis? Did you?
Well,
I mean, you didn't make them out of barrel stays.
No, they probably came from the hardware store. In those days, it was William B. Scott Hardware.
Let's see. Where was that?
That was on Broadway.
I guess so. Things have changed, haven't they? Did any other parts of your extended family, any aunts or uncles or cousins or people like that, live with you?
No.
So just your children and your mother and family?
Yes.
Were you close to any of your other members of the family?
Most of them lived in Newport. Of course, my mother's brothers drifted away, several to New York and a couple to California. But in our formative years, we were fairly close.
Did you have dinner with them on Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that?
Mostly to Grandmother Booth's house. We'd go over there. And then in later years, when the family got larger, someone would come to our house down on Lawrence Avenue.
But you kept in touch pretty well.
Most always, yes.
Do you still do that? Do you still see your cousins or
Yes,
Anything?
yes. Cousin Gordon, cousin, I say he brought us up because he worked for my father for all those years until he became a superintendent to Mrs. J.B. Duke down there at the time, Doris Duke's mother's.
Oh.
And so we saw him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Still do. I saw him just this past week. And my brother Royal comes down from Worcester. And the Thompson house up top of the street there, brother Royal stays there weekends.
That's on Connection Street also.
Corner of Connection and Thames.
Well, how did your cousin Gordon happen to have the Booth house, the homestead?
Well, his sister and his mother stayed with the house, and after one of the uncles died, Uncle Bill, my father's brother, of course every family had their own home, and after Uncle Charlie King died, his widow and her daughter moved back to the homestead over there on Roseneath Avenue. And after she passed on, none of the other families, each having their own home, had any desire for it, so Gordon took it over.
Well, it's good it's still in the family. You'd hate to see that go out of the family, wouldn't you?
I do. There's a nostalgia, I guess.
Well, it's part of your old tradition. Did you have a nickname when you were a boy? In school?
No, just mostly Boots or something like that.
Yeah, you were spared that. Well, you say you went to the Carey School. That is an elementary school, is it?
Yes.
And then where did you go?
Well, it was Carey School, and John Clark School, and then Rogers High School.
John Clark
Public
was
schools.
Middle school?
8th grade, yes. I believe now that what used to be Rogers is called Thompson Junior High, but that was originally Rogers.
Yes, still has the name over
at
the top. Did you like going to school?
I didn't mind school.
You didn't?
No.
Do you have any special preferences and topics or studies?
Not that I recall. I did what we call mechanical drawing. I liked that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a mechanic in the family. I hate grease. But my brother Howard, the youngest one, he was the mechanic. He could be in grease all the time. It never bothered me.
Yeah.
It does bother me.
Yeah, you're more like your father, I guess.
I don't mind soil. Cotton soil or something like that. But
very different.
Grease is another thing.
I don't blame you. Well, did you go on and graduate from high school?
No, I never graduated. I left school in about 1937. I think after 3 years. I didn't go back for the final year.
You just didn't like it that much?
Well, I thought I was smart enough, I guess. I don't know.
Like a lot of young men.
I left there and I took a course at the Art Association. I like drawing.
Oh, really?
And
who did you study with there?
Helena Sturtevant was the teacher.
Oh, is that so?
And Marion Carey.
Yes. I interviewed Marion Carey.
Yeah. She was the resident teacher or something.
Yeah, I think she was the director of the art part too for a good many years. And did you study painting or drawing or all of it?
Yeah, no, mostly painting.
Mostly painting?
Yeah.
Oil or watercolor? Or?
Oils.
Uh-huh. You really like that?
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any now? Did you carry?
Never touch it.
Is that so?
Once in a while, a garden design or something like that, but no painting.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say you studied art, and you eventually went into gardening, didn't you?
I went into the service. When I left school, I worked the summer of 38 for Mrs. William Farnstock, under the gardener then, George W. Kipp. And
now, where was that? Was that one of the estates?
that would be Bois Doré on Narragansett
Oh,
Avenue.
yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
And I stayed there until, I guess it was, I used to work seasonally and get laid off in November.
Mm-hmm.
But I was there at the time of the 1938 hurricane, and so we worked all winter. And they didn't have chainsaws in 38, and it was a two-man saw job cutting the trees that had fallen.
I want to ask you more about that later, but I'd like to just stay with your family for a while. Did you say you worked with your father, and of course you got a lot of your knowledge from him?
Yes.
And from your cousin you were talking about.
Yes.
Then, as far as your family is concerned, were they a particularly religious family? Did they go to church regularly, or was it not part of their life?
I would say fairly. As growing up kids, we went to Sunday school.
Well, what church was it?
The Emmanuel Episcopal Church. And I guess all the families sang in the choir.
Is that so?
At one time or another in the growing up period.
You were all singers?
I don't think so. My father had a good voice. The rest of us went along with the ride, I think.
But you just like singing. And I suppose you celebrated the usual holidays, Christmas and so on, Easter, the usual way.
Yes.
Okay, now could we come to when you grew up and when you got married? Where did you meet your wife?
My wife, in town here in Newport, her father was a motion picture operator, and they lived in Fall River where she was born. And then he came to Newport to work, I believe it was the Opera House or maybe the Strand at the time, one of those. And he moved his family down here. And I met my wife.
How old were you at that time?
In my 20s, I guess.
20s, yeah. And then you were married, and where did you live when you first were married?
Well, I got married in 1944. I was still in the service, still in uniform. And I didn't get out of the service until 1945. And we stayed with her people for a month or so after I got out of service. And then we got an apartment there in Park Home, which is a housing development.
Sure.
And we lived there for almost 3 months, I believe. 2 months, anyway. And then I got the job where I had worked before.
At Bois Doré.
At Bois Doré. But during the war years, it had been purchased by the Nathaniel P. Hill. And, so in 1945, they lived in Park Home, and Mr. Kip was still at Bois Doré.
He was the head gardener.
Yes. And he said, why don't you take my job?
Oh.
He said, I'm going to retire. I was interviewed by Mr. and Mrs. Hill and hired. And there was a cottage on the place available, so we moved in there. And, well, we lived there, raised my family, and I stayed in that job for 33 years.
Well, that was a pretty good move, wasn't it? And when you say Mr. and Mrs. Hill, what was his first name?
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Hill. And they owned that estate until you retired, or when?
Yes, until they died, and I stayed there after Mr. Hill died. Mrs. Hill, we married Admiral Ingersoll, and then Mrs. Hill died, and the estate was sold.
Is that fairly recent?
Yes, worst guy in the world for dates.
Well, I don't mean exactly, but 20 years, 10 years?
No, about 5 years, I'd say.
That recent. Well, you say that your cottage in Bois Doré was where you lived, and that's where your children were born. Now, when were they born, and what were their names?
Again, I don't remember dates. My son...
You don't know your children's birthdays?
Oh, I know February, March, but as for the date, I don't know. My son is about 35, and my daughter's 30, so we had to go back.
Well, we won't figure it out. But what are their names?
Allan Jr. And my daughter's Jennifer.
And where do they live now?
Well, both in Newport. My son, he's married and since divorced. He has 2 children. He, in the tax assessors, is his job now in Newport here. And Jennifer just lives across the street here from me.
Does she?
And she is an engineer with Etna Bridge, so she works all over the state.
Interesting career. Where did she study?
She started engineering at URI and then finished, changed it in the middle of the course and finished at Salva Regina and went teaching school, didn't like it, and then went back to engineering, which she is in now.
And back to URI?
No, she didn't. She just taught elementary education and with a minor in math, and just went back to engineering.
So she didn't have to have further training to get an engineering degree?
Courses. She took courses.
I see. But where were they? At Salve? Or they don't give those courses?
No, they don't. I believe it was Roger Williams.
Oh, yeah.
I know my son, he's the one with the engineering degree. And didn't like engineering. He graduated from Roger Williams. And his degree is in engineering. As I say, he briefly had a garden center in Tiverton.
Oh, he did.
And then the separation and subsequent divorce, and the garden center went. And he went to work with the city of the tax department, tax assessors department.
Must not be very popular.
Not with regional appraisals.
Well, when you were bringing up your children, did your wife do all of the upbringing, or did she have the main responsibility of home, or were you a firm disciplinarian, or more like your father?
No, my wife raised the kids.
She did.
She worked for the first 4 years we were married, and then the son came along, and she left. She worked at the old torpedo station.
Oh, did she, during the war?
And when we started the family, you would call it, she left the department, and family was fairly grown before she went back, and she worked for the school department in the city of Newport in the secretarial capacity until she retired.
When did she retire?
Just recently, within the last 2 years.
Oh, very good. When she was at the torpedo station, was she doing secretarial work there too?
Yes.
When your children were growing up at the cottage, I suppose they were very much, their lives were similar to your lives when you were growing up with. Do they have a lot of neighbors?
No, not really. Just school chums. They too went to Carey School.
Yeah, did they?
And of course we lived down on Webster Street, and most of their friends were school children that they met in school. And
did they come and visit in your house and they go to their other houses? Or how?
Most always they were bringing friends into my house was never locked to any of them.
Yeah. Well, this cottage you lived in, you call it a cottage. It was right on the estate.
Yes.
Where it is now.
Yes.
Of course, you can't see when you pass through on Narragansett what's back in there. What part of the estate was it on?
My cottage was right on Webster Street.
Oh, it was right on the street.
Right on the street. Yes.
Is it still there?
Still there.
Who lives there now?
I have no idea, but I believe it has been rented. So it's rental property. Probably changes hands quite often.
So it's not. It doesn't belong to the gardener anymore.
There is no gardener
there
there
anymore.
Gardener. Just Mrs. Burford, who owns the estate now, has the contractors come in and do the mowing, and she doesn't. The greenhouses are not used, and the gardens are just grassed over.
That must be sad to think about.
It is.
Is it because of the expense these days, do you think?
I don't think it's really expensive as far as she's concerned. Her name was Skelly, and Skelly Oil people, so I don't think it's a matter of money.
She just isn't interested.
Just isn't interested.
Too bad. When did you move here to this house that you're now in?
Well, right after I retired.
Now, when was that?
I retired when I was 62 years old and took my Social Security. And that was officially 4 years ago, but it's been about 5 years since I moved in this cottage.
Oh, you just bought it when you retired?
Yes.
So you have.
Well, no, I bought it a few years before that, and my son lived in here until he moved to Tiverton. And after the breakup of his marriage, then he moved back to Newport.
This looks like one of the old houses in this area, is it? It's very
I
nice,
believe so.
nice little cottage.
I don't know how old it is, but it's been here a number of years. We did quite a bit of work
Oh, I can tell.
on it, and
It's very attractive.
it was the Brown cottage, T.J. Brown landscape. The mother and father lived here. Whether they built it or bought it, I have no idea.
You haven't looked into that. Well, then you can't really say that you've seen a lot of changes in the neighborhood over the years, can you?
I don't think my neighborhood has changed.
Well, not in the short time you've been here, I
The
guess.
city has changed, but all the growth hasn't been in this immediate neighborhood. The growth has been what we call uptown and the Ocean Drive area. It's sad to see that go up in all these condominium things. I'm not in favor of that.
No, most of us aren't. Only the people who are making the money, I guess. Well, maybe you could tell me a little about the neighborhood where the Booth homestead is. Have you noticed any changes around it?
No, not surprisingly. Roseneath Avenue, there's maybe one or two new houses, probably in the last 50 years that's been there.
Is that right?
And right here on Connection Street, I think there's probably only one new house in 50 years.
Isn't that amazing? And nice to see. Do you know a lot of your neighbors?
No, I can't say I'm very friendly with them. I know, of course, the people on both sides of me and back of me. My daughter across the street. But I know them, yes, know them to say hello to, but we don't.
But you don't visit back and forth very much, yeah. Do you think that are there all sorts of people living in the neighborhood? Are there young people, old people?
I would say it's quite a mix. There are, of course, a lot of children in here, but right in this stretch of Connection Street, I'd say they're mostly like I am, elderly, but most retired. And further down the street, there are younger couples with children, but most are older neighborhoods.
So it's quiet, peaceful most of the time, I suppose.
I would say it's quiet. We seldom have any. Well, a police car or a street sweeper that disturbs the calm.
Not bothered by tourists coming in very much.
Not at all, no.
So a nice neighborhood. Well, what about your wife? Is she more friendly with the neighbors than you are, which sometimes happens?
Yes, she speaks and talks to Mrs. Panacci across the street. They have a cup of coffee together and something like that.
Okay. Is there any community center in this area or a little community store where people sort of gather and talk things over? Or
well, Sig's grocery store on Carroll Avenue there does a tremendous business, and you meet most of your neighbors in there. And of course, the top of the street, as far as I'm concerned, I go in Siggy's, but my wife is the shopper. But I meet most of the friends and neighbors in the barber shop.
Oh, I
top
see.
Of the street.
Which barber shop is that?
Vinny's bar, Vinny Catalina.
Well, I wonder if we could go a little more into, well, a good deal more into your career as a gardener. I've been told that you're the dean of gardeners in Newport. So you must have a great deal of knowledge. And I also was told that you know something about Wakehurst.
Well, that's where we grew up.
I see. I was not thinking of the right place. And that's the beautiful building that you just never see unless there's something like a decorator's showcase.
Yes, that's right.
Beautiful old building, isn't it?
Yes.
And
gray sandstone building.
And your father was in charge of the grounds there. Did you actually work with him in the summertime or after school?
During the summer vacations, we went on the payroll and we worked with my father.
Did you like doing that?
Yes.
You really enjoyed it?
Yes, I enjoyed that.
What kind of things did you do when you were learning as a child, as a boy?
Mostly in the greenhouse, or of course in the summertime would be mowing grass.
Did you do any planting or
cultivating?
Yes,
they had 2 formal sunken gardens there.
Oh, really?
At Wakehurst, and that was quite a thing to plant those out. And of course, we had a very extensive vegetable garden. And
well, now that was for the use of the family and for employees too, was it?
Most of it was for the family, and I remember we'd go in to the big house every morning and ask the chef what he wanted, then go back and cut it and wash it and deliver it. And of course, there was always enough, something's left over, so as far as a head of cabbage or lettuce or things like that, the staff could have that.
Well, what kind of vegetables did you plant? Was there a big variety?
Quite a big variety, I would say. Outside of the tomatoes and cabbage and lettuce, and we'd have to raise dill and chervil and shallots and things for the French chefs.
Herbs of all kinds. Was there an herb garden?
Yeah, no, just we treated them all more or less as annuals.
Oh, I see.
And the plow turned them under in the fall, start again in the spring.
For goodness sake. Well, did you have any kind of special vegetables that ordinary people might not eat? Special things?
No, outside of the herbs, much of it was standard. The chervil, much like a parsley, for garnishing.
Yes. But you didn't have any exotic vegetables, like Chinese cabbage or something like that?
Not really, no.
Yeah. Well, tell me, was that a very big garden? It must have been. How much area did that cover?
About 3 acres.
Ooh, that's pretty good size.
Yeah.
How many people did it take to cultivate and keep that going?
There was 2 men in the garden all the time.
Well, now, what about this sunken garden? How big was it?
I would say, roughly speaking, I'd say maybe a half acre, about roughly 150 by 150, something like that. And beds laid out with a large weather sundial type in the center of it, and the beds radiated from that.
Or were there hedges, box, or anything like that?
Yes, there was a hedge, a low hedge immediately around it, and the pathway, and then 4 steps, one on each side, leading down to the garden. The pathways in the garden were all grass. The banks were grass, of course.
And what sort of flowers were planted?
Mostly, I would say, begonias, pink begonias with alyssum edging type of thing like that.
No roses?
In the north garden was all roses.
Oh, you had a rose garden too.
That was a sun garden too, but that was all roses.
And the unusual roses, a variety, what sort of roses were they?
Mostly the hybrid teas of that day, but we didn't use them for cutting flowers because we had a rose house in the greenhouses, and most of the roses, as used for cut, were greenhouse grown.
Did you have to supply the house with roses every day during?
Yes, we'd cut about every day, and that was my cousin Gordon's job, to go in the big house and arrange the flowers, put them around.
Did he arrange them too?
Yes.
Oh, really? How many did it require for a house?
Oh, I don't know. There might have been 15 or 20 vases or more.
That was
in
a job.
the house. Well, you didn't change every vase every day, but you'd maybe change 5 or 6 of them every day. So it was a rotating thing.
Did you ever help with that job?
Yes, quite often. But my father made most of the centerpiece if there's going to be a dinner or things like that.
He was an expert at arranging flowers too.
Yes, he and his brothers at one time had the Booth Brothers Florists over there in the homestead in Bellevue Avenue.
Oh, I see. How long was that in existence? Was that before you were born?
No, when I was young or older, probably I was 10 before I was.
So he did that on the side, in addition to his other jobs?
He and his 2 brothers, named the Booth Brothers, Florists. And then they, this was of course before World War II, and after that, my cousin Bill ran it until he retired, which is, all during the war, except for the time he was in the Seabees, I believe, during service.
When did he go out of business?
Just right after the
after the war.
Help was hard to get, and deliveries impossible, and so they just.
Well, did you like raising flowers or vegetables, or did it matter at all?
It didn't matter. I just like to see things grow.
And you did the planting and every bit of the gardening?
The whole process. Sowing the seed, the planting, harvesting the crop.
And who decided what seeds to buy? And where did you buy them?
Well, of course, when I worked my father bought the seeds. In those days, there were traveling seedsmen who would come in, and there were more seedsmen around then, and you'd see one every week, I think.
Is that so? Where'd they come from?
Well, for once, they came from England, from Holland.
They did? All that distance?
You'd buy your bulbs, of course, from Holland. They'd come over in the summertime, and you'd order your Dutch bulbs, and you'd get delivery roughly, say in October, you'd deliver them. And and we used to buy the bulbs pre-cooled, so they were readily forced. And during the winter, we'd force the tulips and hyacinths and daffodils and like that.
Well, now, that was in the greenhouse.
In the greenhouse.
You never put them out in the open ground?
No,
They were
almost
always
never.
in the greenhouse.
You just used for forcing.
I see. Then you didn't order seeds for Burpee and that sort of thing in those days, huh?
No, seeds from Suttons of England and the bulbs from Holland. And yes, there was Vaughan's Seed Company that had a representative coming around and
They didn't just send you a catalog and leave it to you to order. They came around and
they came
gave you personal service.
Yeah, always.
Things are different. Of course, there was a lot of money involved in those estates, and they would make more of an effort, I suppose.
Yes, because they used a tremendous amount of seeds and bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the greenhouse, everything was grown as a cut flower.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was cut. There was very few stove plants, we call them.
What is that? Stove?
Well, the things that require high temperature hothouses.
Oh.
Like the palms and the crotons.
Oh, I
and
see. Tropical kind
tropical
of things.
things.
I
Yes.
see. Mm-hmm.
There was a big palm house at Wakehurst. And all the tropicals, and then along with the gardenias, and orchids, roses.
Well, now, what did the family do with those tropicals? Did they take them into the house for certain events that they were giving? Or?
Yes, they were, like at the foot of the stairs or statuary, there's urns there which required the plants.
Mm-hmm.
And you could only, like when Mrs. Van Allen, she was a widow for a good many years, and the house she kept it extremely warm, so you changed plants quite often.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the Van Allens. Which Van Allens were they? The present Van Allen must be a descendant, or?
The present Van Allen would be, say, Jimmy Van Allen.
Uh-huh.
It was his mother.
That was his mother.
Yes.
What was his father's name?
James L.
James L. Junior, I guess. Well, what sorts of flowers did you grow? Was there a big variety?
I would say just about everything.
Yeah. Was it rather like going to Longwood Gardens, for instance?
Well, yes and no. Much the same, only on a smaller scale,
Yes,
of course.
Sure. Well, it must have been a great deal of fun to raise all those pretty flowers, watch them grow.
Well, it's work, and you've got to like it to do it because of the labor involved.
How many people were working at You said there were 2 gardeners for the vegetable garden. Did the same gardeners work in the flower gardens?
No. In the flower garden, they might work in the rose garden at one time, but then there was 5 on the other side of the street within the wall that just took care of the main grounds over there.
Mm-hmm. And then the whole staff was under your father's direction?
Yes.
How many were there altogether?
Well, he'd hire summer help to college boys who would come out for the summer. He did 3 or 4 of them every summer, and but he had a permanent staff of about 7.
Mm-hmm.
So during the summer, that would go up to 10 or 12 even.
What do you suppose the payroll for 7 people was?
Not very much compared to today's standard, because I worked for my father, And in those days, the men got $85.50 a month.
Well, it sounds
per
very little.
month. Well, I know one time during the summer, I didn't work for him one year because Mrs. Harold Brown was paying $95 a month, so I went to work for Mrs. Harold Brown.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Of course, living expenses were a lot lower in those days, so it was more money than it seems today.
Well, it cost everything. A loaf of bread today was $1.09. Yes. I don't think you paid the 9 cents in those days for a loaf of bread.
So you have to compare prices like that. Well, when you were working at Bois Doré, you succeeded Mr. Kipp. You moved in and you took over. What sort of staff did you have under you?
Well, I had a different type of job. I was superintendent of the estate, and I had 2 men in the garage took care of the cars. There was 2 men in the greenhouse at all time, and there was 4 men on the grounds at all the time. And then the houseman in the house was on my payroll too.
Oh, you really had charge of everything.
We opened the house and closed the house, hired the cleaning women. Everything. I had nothing to do with the staff inside the house. But as far as maintenance of the buildings and everything else I did.
Well, if you had all those responsibilities, did you get to do much gardening yourself?
Oh, yes. I ordered the seeds and saw that they were planted and cut. And I, too, did the decorating of the centerpiece and things like that.
Very similar to what your father had done.
Yes.
Were the seeds still bought in the same way?
Yes,
They still came around?
They still come around. In fact, I don't know of any that come around today, but the people selling the insecticides still come around. Horticultural insecticides.
Did you use many insecticides in your gardening?
Yes, quite a number. We had our own spray program, and insecticides and fungicides, and the spraying of the trees and the lawns. Quite a bit.
Were you using DDT in those days?
Yes, DDT and most of the esters for the lawn, the 2,4-D. But when we first started DDT, because it wasn't heard of, most of it was basically nicotine and soap.
Were those pretty effective?
Very effective as far as aphids and things like that, soft-bodied insects.
How do you feel about using those as compared with the modern-day insecticides?
Well, frankly, they didn't bother us because we'd spray with, say, called Wilson's OK, which was, as I say, basically nicotine and soap. And today, the insecticides scare me just reading the directions.
It's too bad they can't go back to nicotine and soap if they were so effective. And they weren't harmful, were they?
Well, I don't ever remember in the greenhouse when I was growing up having white fly and things like that. Aphis was the big thing. And of course, in the orchid house and in the palms, once in a while some of the, especially if you got a shipment of palms or things from Florida, they might bring a little scale with them and things like that.
But you were on the alert anyway for those.
Yes.
Well, tell me more about the size of the gardens at Bois Doré. You had greenhouses. How big were the greenhouses, and what kinds were they?
Well, the greenhouse was a small house. Was probably 70 feet long and maybe 20 feet wide. And then there was a 19 sash hot frame on the side. And then running north and south, which we call a big greenhouse, was 100 by 40.
That's big. And you had a tropical greenhouse, you say?
Just orchids at Bois Doré. The tropical stuff was at Wakehurst.
Yes, but you didn't have one in Broadway.
No.
What did you do with the orchids? Were they taken in the house to be used for display there, or?
Yes, Mrs. Hill wanted Bois Doré. She wanted flowers all over the house, and we'd take the orchid plant and all in. And she didn't like to see those cut. Everything else was cut, but the orchids we put the whole plant in pot and all, and changed them as they died or faded.
Yes, that's quite an art, isn't it, to raise orchids?
Not really.
No?
I think it's one of the easiest things to grow.
Really?
It's just a matter of the proper environment, the humidity and the heat. Of course, and most of the orchids don't like strong sunlight, so you keep your houses in condition.
Well, how do you start an orchid?
Well, I've never raised orchids. I bought plantlets and planted them, but the cattleyas take roughly about 7 years from seed to flower. So unless you're an enthusiast, you let somebody else do the playing.
Yes, I guess so. Didn't dream it took that long. How many would you have in your greenhouse? How many orchids would you have?
Hundreds. I don't know, but hundreds.
Many varieties?
Yes, at Wakehurst, it was mostly cattleyas, and we called it the Cattleya House. But at Bois Doré, I had the cattleyas and some vandas and odd pieces of things that the dendrobiums and things like that someone would give Mrs. Ingersoll or Mrs. Hill at the time a gift, and so we just add it to the collection.
Well, when you were buying the plantlets, as you call them, where would you get them?
Mostly from California.
You ordered them, they were shipped here?
Yeah, they'd send you a catalog. And even today you can get a catalog and pick out what you want and the size you want.
This is an interview with Mr. Allan Booth in his home at 48 Connection Street, Newport, Rhode Island. It will be concerned with Mr. Booth's life history and is part of the Newport Historical Society's Oral History Project. The interviewer is Beth Everett, the date June 11, 1984. Mr. Booth, do you consent to have this conversation taped?
Surely.
Mr. Booth, where were you born?
I was born in Newport, Rhode Island.
In a hospital? Home?
No, at home. I believe.
Where was that?
Well, at the time, it was on Roseneath Avenue.
Roseneath. And what part of section is that?
That's down here in the 4th Ward.
This is in the,
At an early age, we moved to Lawrence Avenue. My father was the head gardener for James L. Van Allen.
Oh, I see.
And
now is Lawrence Avenue also in 4th Ward?
yeah, well, yes, 4th Ward, 3rd Voting District.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me who your parents were. Who was your father?
My father was John A. Booth, and he too was born here in Newport.
Oh, and what, also in this area?
Yes, the Booth homestead is on Rosalie's Avenue.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. And what about your mother? Where was she born?
She was born here in Newport. I believe the family at the time, I was told, lived on West Street.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was her name?
her name was Cora Thompson,
Mm-hmm.
her maiden name.
Was that a family who had been in Newport for a while?
Yes, her mother's people, were named Weaver. They came from England on the ship, I believe it was called the Lion. It was the second ship that came after the Mayflower.
Is that so? Very interesting. Was it a big family?
Yes, I believe in my mother's family there were 9, and my father's family, 6.
That's pretty good. Well, families were big in those days.
Yes.
Well, what about your father's family? When did they arrive in Newport?
My father's family were both born in England and immigrated here. I don't know what the year was, but in the early 1800s.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you know why they came here?
No, I think Grandfather Booth had served in the army, and then he was a fruit grower, and they had a range of glass over here, and they raised fruit, grapes particularly, and perhaps that's what brought them here. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Well, was your grandfather Booth a gardener or a horticulturist? What did he do?
Yes, he was. He was a mostly, I suppose you'd call it truck garden now, and with the greenhouses, with the fruit and early vegetables, things like that, out of season type of thing.
Were those his own greenhouses, or did he work for someone else?
No, he was his own greenhouse. He built himself.
Here in the Newport area?
Yes, in Rosalie's Avenue.
Are those gardens still there?
No, the homestead is, but where the greenhouses were, that's been built over homes on that piece of property now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mentioned the homestead. Is any of the family still living in it?
Yes, my cousin Gordon owns it now, and he and his wife still live there.
Mm-hmm. So it's quite an old house.
Yes, quite an old house.
Mm-hmm. Well, now your grandfather Booth, you say, was a gardener. Did he teach your father any of his business or profession? Or?
Well, I think so. Teaching, when you grow up with the business, you just learn it. I don't, naturally you're taught the correct way of doing things, but as for formal schooling, no, you just grow with it.
You just learned at home.
Yeah.
And he helped his father in the gardening that he was doing.
In the garden, in the greenhouses, and then I was perhaps 5 or 6 months old when my father went to work for J.L. Van Allen, and we lived on the place. My father was there for 35 years.
Oh, now you say the Van Allen estate. Is that the one that burned a few years ago?
No, that the property is now owned by Salvatina College.
Oh, it's over.
It's on Oka Point.
Oh, let's see. Now, which building is that?
It's the one with the high gray granite wall around it.
That's not the main building.
No,
No.
no. It's just diagonally across from the main building. Colette.
On Oka Point Avenue?
Oka Point Avenue.
And is there a corner street there too that borders?
It's bounded by Oka Point, Lawrence, Leroy Avenue, and Shepherd Avenue.
And it was all that big area,
All
Van
right,
Allen
yes.
Estate.
And we lived between Leroy and Webster.
I see.
Family cottage and the greenhouses were there. They've since all disappeared. The house is still there, but the greenhouses are gone.
Well, you say the family cottage. Did that belong to the estate, or was that your own?
No, it belonged to the estate.
It's by the estate. Now, you say that you were just a baby when your father took that job. So you lived there for a good many years of your life, I guess.
I lived there until the time I went in the army, and I was 41, something there. And
So that's where
I
you
was
grew up.
probably 24 years old, something like that at the time.
Did your father do anything, did he have time to do anything around the house, helping the family, your mother, with things that sort of indoor chores, or were you just too busy with his gardening?
No, my father was not a houseman. Because he had 6 or 8 men working for him, but any time my mother wanted painting done or something, he'd just send one of the men up to do it.
Oh, he was lucky he had someone like that, wasn't he? Well, did your mother mind? She had how many children?
5. 4 boys and 1 girl.
Only 1 girl. Well, did she cope all right? Did she manage to
Oh, yes.
do all that
We
work?
all got fed and clothed and...
Kept her busy, though.
Yes, sure did.
Well, who were your brothers and sisters? Tell me their names.
Well, my oldest brother is Alfred Royal Booth. He goes A.R. Booth, or Royal, we call him.
Does he live in Middletown?
No, he lives in Worcester, outside of Worcester, Auburn, Mass. And my sister was second oldest. She was Grace Thalmer, and we all called her Thalmer. And the next in line was Clifford, John Clifford. We called him Clifford.
Use the second name.
Yeah. And then me, and I have no middle name.
Oh, well, I wondered because you didn't give me one.
And then my younger brother, Howard T., because we always called him Howard.
He was the exception. Well, how did you all get along together? Were you pretty good friends as children?
Oh yes, even to this day we have no family squabbles.
Isn't that nice? Was there pretty strong discipline in the family, or were you treated with gentleness, or how did it go?
I would say it wasn't strong discipline. There was a lot of guidance, but no, we were treated pretty well with, I guess, respect or freedom, given us our freedom. And, as I say, there was a few guidelines, or you'd get the back of your hand. And something like that.
Was that usually from your father or your mother?
No, just my father.
Your mother didn't do that kind of thing.
No.
Well, where did you children play? Now, you were in the estate area, but you were in close, so there must have been children around you.
Yes, there were neighboring children. We were pretty much alone, but we went to Carey School, which was, between Narragansett Avenue and Carey Street.
Mm-hmm.
And most of our friends were around here, and we played, of course, in Morton Park. Or my brother Howard was more into sports than I was.
Okay.
He played baseball and things like that. And during the winter, we went down to the Army Pond skating.
Sure.
And
that was a big sport in early days. I guess we don't have much cold weather for it anymore.
I don't think the winters aren't as
Uh-huh.
great or as cool.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I remember cutting ice, but now I don't think you could cut ice anywhere on the island.
Where do they cut the ice? In Almy Pond?
No, and they cut ice on the Lily Pond,
Uh-huh.
and they cut ice on the Big Pond down there.
Is that so? And stored it for summer?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And sawdust or whatever?
Well, there was a big ice house at the top of Wellington Avenue in those days.
Oh, okay.
Red brick building.
Did it last all summer long?
As far as I know, it did.
That seems so surprising when we have such comparatively warm winters now, and you usually can't even skate. Well, you say you weren't much interested in sports. Well, what sort of things did you like to do?
Oh, it's sports. I mean, we all had bicycles,
Mm-hmm.
and during the winter it was ice skating or skiing, something like that.
Oh, you skied too?
We skied.
Where did you ski?
Well, in those days, as young kids at the Morton Park, or over in the hills, the Lily Pond. There was no housing there then.
I see. You sort of, where did you get your skis? Did you?
Well,
I mean, you didn't make them out of barrel stays.
no, they probably came from the hardware store. In those days, it was William B. Scott Hardware.
Oh, let's see. Where was that?
That was on Broadway.
Uh-huh. I guess so. Things have changed, haven't they? Did any other parts of your extended family, any aunts or uncles or cousins or people like that, live with you?
No.
Was it just your children and your mother and family?
Yes.
Were you close to any of your other members of the family? Aunts and
Most of them lived in Newport.
Uh-huh.
Of course, my mother's brothers drifted away. Several to New York and a couple to California. But in our formative years, we were fairly close.
Mm-hmm. Did you have dinner with them on Thanksgiving and Christmas and things like that?
Mostly to Grandmother Booth's house. We'd go over there. Mm-hmm. And then in later years, when the family got larger, someone would come to our house down on Lawrence Avenue.
Mm-hmm. But you kept in touch pretty well.
Most always, yes.
Do you still do that? Do you still see your cousins or?
Yes, yes. Cousin Gordon, cousin, I say he brought us up because he worked for my father for all those years until he became a superintendent to Mrs. J.B. Duke down there at the time, Doris Duke's mother's.
Oh.
And so we saw him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And still do. I saw him just this past week. And my brother Royal comes down from Worcester.
Mm-hmm.
And the Thompson house up the top of the street there, Brother Royal stays there weekends.
That's on Connection Street also.
Connection Street. Corner of Connection and Thames.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did your cousin Gordon happen to have the Booth house, the homestead?
Well, his sister and his mother. His mother stayed with the house, and after one of the uncles died, Uncle Bill, my father's brother, of course every family had their own home, and after Uncle Charlie King died, his widow and her daughter moved back to the homestead over there on Roseneath Avenue. And after she passed on, none of the other families, each having their own home, had any desire for it, so Gordon took it over.
Well, it's good it's still in the family. You'd hate to see that go out of the family, wouldn't you?
I do. There's a nostalgia, I guess.
Yeah, it's part of your old tradition. Did you have a nickname when you were a boy? In school?
No, just mostly Boots or something like that.
Yeah, you were spared that. Well, you say you went to the Carey School. And that is an elementary school, is it?
Yes.
And then where did you go?
Well, it was Carey School, John Clark School, and then Rogers High School.
John Clark
Public
was
schools.
Middle school?
8th grade, yes.
Uh-huh.
I believe now that what used to be Rogers is called Thompson
Yes.
Junior High, but that was originally Rogers.
Yes, still has the name over
Yes.
at the top. Did you like going to school?
I didn't mind school.
You didn't?
No.
Do you have any special preferences and topics or studies?
Not that I recall. I did what we call mechanical drawing. I liked that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I wasn't a mechanic in the family. I hate grease. But my brother Howard, the youngest one, he was the mechanic. He could be in grease all the time. It never bothered me.
Yeah.
It does bother me.
Yeah, you're more like your father, I guess.
I don't mind soil. Cotton soil or
sure,
something like that. But
very
grease,
different.
Grease is another thing.
I don't blame you. Well, did you go on and graduate from high school?
No, I never graduated. I left school in about 1937. I think after 3 years. I didn't go back for the final year.
You just didn't like it that much.
Well, I thought I was smart enough, I guess. I don't know.
Like a lot of young
I
men.
left there and I took a course at the Art Association. I like
Oh,
drawing.
really? Uh-huh.
And
Who did you study with there?
Helena Sturtevant was the teacher.
Oh, is that so?
And Marion Carey.
Yes. I interviewed Marion Carey.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She was the resident teacher or something.
Yeah, I think she was the director of the art part too
Whatever
for a good
title
many
was.
years. Uh-huh. And did you study painting or drawing or all of it?
Yeah. No, mostly painting.
Mostly painting?
Yeah.
Oil or watercolor? Or?
Oils.
Uh-huh. You really like that?
Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm. Do you do any now? Did you carry?
Never touch it.
Is that so?
Once in a while, a garden design or something like that, but no painting.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say you studied art, and you eventually went into gardening, didn't you?
I went into the service. When I left school, I worked the summer of 38 for Mrs. William Farnstock under the gardener then, George W. Kipp. And
Now, where was that? Was that one of the estates?
that would be Bois Doré on Narragansett
Oh,
Avenue.
yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
And I stayed there until I guess it was I used to work seasonally and get laid off in November, but I was there at the time of the 1938 hurricane, and so we worked all winter. We didn't have chainsaws in '38, and it was a two-man saw job cutting the trees that had fallen.
I want to ask you more about that later, but I'd like to just stay with your family for a while. Did you say you worked with your father, and of course you got a lot of your knowledge from him?
Yes.
And from your cousin you were talking about.
Yes.
Then, as far as your family is concerned, were they a particularly religious family? Did they go to church regularly, or was it not part of their life?
I would say fairly. We, as growing up kids, we went to Sunday school.
Well, what church was it?
The Emmanuel Episcopal Church. And I guess all the families sang in the choir.
Is that so?
At one time or another in the growing up period.
You were all singers.
I don't think so. My father had a good voice. The rest of us went along with the ride, I think.
But you just like singing. Then I suppose you celebrated the usual holidays, Christmas and so on, Easter, the usual way.
Yes.
Okay, now could we come to when you grew up and when you got married? Where did you meet your wife?
My wife, in town here in Newport, her father was a motion picture operator, and they lived in Fall River where she was born. And then he came to Newport to work, I believe it was the Opera House or maybe the Strand at the time, one of those. And he moved his family down here. And I met my wife.
How old were you at that time?
In my 20s, I guess.
20s, yeah. And then you were married, and where did you live when you first were married?
Well, I got married in 1944. I was still in the service, still in uniform. And I didn't get out of the service until 1945. And we stayed with her people for a month or so after I got out of service. And then we got an apartment there in Park Home, which is a housing development.
Sure.
And we lived there for almost 3 months, I believe. 2 months, anyway. And then I got the job where I had worked before.
At Bois Doré.
At Bois Doré. But during the war years, it had been purchased by the Nathaniel P. Hill. And, so in 1945, I was living in Park Home, and Mr. Kip was still at Bois Doré.
He was the head gardener?
Yes. And he said, why don't you take my job? He said, I'm going to retire. I was interviewed by Mr. and Mrs. Hill and hired. And there was a cottage on the place available, so we moved in there. And, well, we lived there, raised my family, and I stayed in that job for 33 years.
Well, that was a pretty good move, wasn't it? And when you say Mr. and Mrs. Hill, what was his first name?
Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Hill. And they owned that estate until you retired, or when?
Yes, until they died, and I stayed there after Mr. Hill died. Mrs. Hill remarried Admiral Ingersoll, and then Mrs. Hill died, and the estate was sold.
Is that fairly recent?
Yes, worst guy in the world for dates.
Well, I don't mean exactly, but 20 years, 10 years?
No, about 5 years, I'd say.
Oh, that recent. Mm-hmm. Well, you say that your cottage in Bois Doré was where you lived, and that's where your children were born. Now, when were they born, and what were their names?
Again, I don't remember dates. My son...
You don't know your children's birthdays?
Oh, I know February, March, but as for the date, I don't know. My son is about 35, and my daughter's 30, so we have to go back to that.
We won't figure it out. But what are their names?
Allan Jr., and my daughter's Jennifer.
And where do they live now?
Well, both in Newport. My son, he's married and since divorced. He has 2 children. He in the tax assessors is his job now in Newport here. And Jennifer just lives across the street here from me.
Does she?
And she is an engineer with Etna Bridge, so she works all over the state.
Interesting career. Where did she study?
She started engineering at URI, and then finished, changed it in the middle of the course, and finished at Salva Regina, and went teaching school, didn't like it, and then went back to engineering, which she is in now.
And back to URI?
No, she didn't. She just taught elementary education, and with a minor in math, and just went back to engineering.
So she didn't have to have further training to get an engineering degree?
Courses. She took courses.
Oh, I see. But where were they? At Salve? Or they don't give those courses?
No, they don't. I believe it was Roger Williams.
Oh, yeah.
I know my son, he's the one with the engineering degree. Didn't like engineering. He graduated from Roger Williams. And his degree is in engineering. As I say, he briefly had a garden center in Tiverton. And then the separation and subsequent divorce, and the garden center went. And he went to work for the city of the tax department, tax assessors department.
Must not be very popular.
Not with regional appraisals.
Well, when you were bringing up your children, did your wife do all of the upbringing, or did she have the main responsibility of home, or were you a firm disciplinarian, or more like your father?
No, my wife raised the kids.
She did.
She worked for the first 4 years we were married, and then her son came along, and she left. She worked at the old torpedo station.
Oh, did she, during the war?
And when we started the family, you would call it, she left the department and Oh, I guess, family was fairly grown before she went back, and she worked for the school department in the city of Newport in a secretarial capacity until she retired.
When did she retire?
Just recently, within the last 2 years.
Oh, very good. When she was at the torpedo station, was she doing secretarial work there too?
Yes.
When your children were growing up at the cottage, I suppose we were still talking about the orchids and that you ordered them from catalogs. They were shipped from California, except for the ones that were gifts. And that was your
Well, if you went, say, to the Boston Flower Show or the New York Flower Show and saw something that you wanted and you'd order it from there.
Was that part of your job, going to the flower shows and looking things over?
Yes, we went to New York to the shows all the time, and my father judged in New York a couple of times.
Oh, did he?
And I never judged in New York, but I judged in Boston shows and down the Cape to the shows. Yes, I'd say most of the orchids would come from California.
Well, when you were a judge of
Possibly
flowers,
Florida.
Florida too, yes. When you were a judge, how did you get to be a judge? Somebody invited you to come up and take part?
You were invited, yes.
Are there flower organizations and they would write to you and say, would you participate? How?
The Massachusetts Horticultural Society it's still quite large, but it was very large and effective. And a man named Arnold Nerling was in charge, executive secretary, whatever his title was. And you would get a letter from him asking if you'd like to judge, and you would have the category and the time of judging and things like that, and you just had to answer it.
When you say category, do you mean certain flowers that you were supposed to judge, like roses or?
Well, when you judge a show, unless it's a very small show, you just judge exhibits, and you'd be judging, and there'd be dozens of displays in each class, and you'd be judging perhaps one or two classes. You'd either be judging the gardens, or you'd be judging cut flowers, or you'd be judging plants or whatever. But you wouldn't judge the whole thing. You just stay in one class.
Sure. Well, then you were a member of this society, I imagine, yourself, were you?
I was a member of the Newport Horticultural Society, Boston, or the Mass Horticultural Society, and the Rhode Island Horticultural Society.
Those very big organizations, I suppose?
They're not as active today as they were. The largest, I believe, was the Mass Horticultural Society with 20,000 members, I suppose.
And they were in charge of putting the flower shows together, and
Yes.
I guess they still do.
I don't know the present director, but when Mr. Nerling retired, he was the last one I could say I knew.
Well, that must have been very interesting. Take part in it.
It's interesting. I think it's more fun in the smaller shows, like you'd be asked to judge down at the Cape or one of the shopping centers out Framingham Way or somewhere up there.
Where did you go on the Cape? Where would there be shows there?
Hyannis, places like that. There was a place called Cotuit.
Sure, I know Cotuit.
And you'd get some of the local towns around there, they'd get together and have their shows. Mostly like up in Topsfield, a lot of the growers there they'd have a flower show at the time of the Topsfield Fair. So, and then Framingham and the shopping centers, would be local grows from Woburn and those towns around there would get together to put on one show.
Sure. Well, now, when you went to the flower shows, was it entirely up to you to go and look them over and decide if you wanted any of them? Did Mrs. Hill ever go too?
At the New York shows, I never judged, but I would meet Mrs. Hill and go through the shows with her. She wanted some of those and some of those, so I'd take notes
And get them. Sure. Now I also have a spy who told me that you had developed a special Newport begonia. Is that true?
Well, I crossed begonias, and we got one seedling which was white with a pink edge, and then it took a few years to gather the seed and keep the rogues out, so you got a good strain, and that's the pink one, the white with a pink edge, and we kept that to ourselves. Mrs. Ingersoll did, Mr. Hill, Mrs. Hill, and later Mrs. Ingersoll, after Mr. Hill died, she gave it to the society. We kept it, as I say, as an exclusive for a few years, and then she gave it to the Preservation Society, and of course since then it's widely used, but it's planted out in front of the planting in front of Rosecliff, right at the front door.
Oh, well, I'm just across the street from there, so I'll go over and look sometime. Did you name it?
No, we just called it the Newport one, pink edge.
Did you develop any other plants?
No, not really. We used to play, well, all gardeners, I guess, do. We raised melons in the greenhouse, when you'd have your own cross and it would be jealously guarded, so you wouldn't give it to anyone else. Once in a while, if Mrs. Hill gave a melon to somebody, and try to find out where it was going, so no one would use your seeds.
Yes, that's a thought.
But I know over at Stuart Duncan's, they had their own strain, and out to the Van Buren's, they had their own strain, and so everyone jealously guarded their melons.
That's interesting. But when you say melons, do you mean cantaloupe or just any kind of
Well, I think most of them originated from England, the greenhouse melons, and they were a cantaloupe type. But one of the forerunners was one called Cotting's Hybrid, which came from England, and it was the forerunner. And after that, people added their own strains. And
It's like breeding dogs.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. You couldn't give them away because you'd be giving away the seeds. If you wanted to keep them, that's tricky. Now, another thing that I've heard about you is that you're a great expert on grapes, and that there were some greenhouses belonging to the Ingersoll estate, or Hill estate, on Calvashall Avenue. Is that true?
Yes, we had a grapery down there, greenhouses.
Are they still there?
Half of it. The Preservation Society naturally didn't want to spend time or money on grapes, but they do. The Ingersoll girls, Hill girls, Mrs. Van Buren and Mrs. Hamilton, still own the property, and they let the Preservation Society have use of the houses.
Oh, I see. How many houses are there?
2.
2 houses and the greenhouses.
2, no.
Oh, 2 greenhouses.
Two greenhouses.
I'm sorry, yes, I see.
There's 2 outer buildings on the property, but we just use those for storage,
Uh-huh.
for equipment.
Do you still have anything to do with that?
No.
You don't work with those at all. Does the Preservation Society raise flowers in there now?
Yes, they do.
For their own?
They raise the flowers, and of course they have palms and things like that.
Tropical.
Yeah, well, a lot of ferns and things. Of course, they maintain all the houses, as you know, in Newport.
Yes.
And they have their own staff to replace and replace, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Well, now, when this was a grapery, is that what it was called?
Yes.
How did that start? I mean, was it there when you began to work for the Hills?
The story goes, and it's only a story, that the Queen of England gave some plants to the then Mrs. Widener. And Widener built the greenhouses and maintained the grapery. Mr. Widener died. She later became the wife of Dr. Rice. And when that group died off, and the property was sold then to Mrs. Hill, and she maintained the grapes.
Well, now that would have been Queen Victoria, I guess, right?
That's only a story.
Only queen I can imagine it would have been. Well, tell me what the grapery was. How did it operate?
The grapery was one long house, about 125 feet long, and maybe 20 feet wide, divided into 3 sections. And we tried to get, sometimes our weatherman wouldn't cooperate, but you'd have to get your canes dormant. And sometimes you wouldn't get a killing weather until December. And we'd start the first house, try to start the first house, at the 1st of January.
Oh.
And then after it broke and started to make growth, then you start the second house. So we'd cut fruit from the 4th of July until Thanksgiving. And then go back and repeat the process again.
Well, were they white grapes, purple grapes?
2. One, the Muscat of Alexandra is a white grape, and the Black Hamburg is black, of course.
Yes. And of course they were seeded grapes. They were not seedless.
No, they were seeded.
Very good?
Yes. I'd say they're very good.
Very sweet.
It's quite a job. Like now, the grapes should be beginning to seed, and you'd have to thin them out. And then when it comes June or July, when it's late June, after all the work and thinning out, then you'd pray for dry weather and a lot of heat to get the sugar content up into the grapes.
Mm-hmm. They were all inside, and they grew from the ground. I'm purely ignorant about this. And you had supports.
Yes, they grew up on wires.
Oh.
The canes were a single stem, and we tie the laterals off it, and we tried to try 40 pounds to a cane or less. So we'd thin them out so that you let the bunches hang, and try to keep the weight down so not to put too much strain on the cane.
Yes.
And also to get a higher quality fruit.
Oh, I see. Were they very big bunches, like you see in pictures, really
Yes.
hanging down?
Yes.
Must have been beautiful.
was quite a sight.
So ideally you had some coming, getting ripe early, and then they keep on ripening until as late as possible.
Yeah.
And they were always purely for eating. They weren't wine grapes.
No, a table grape.
Yeah. Did you have to have special tools to work on grapes?
Well, not special. We bought scissors, much like a barber's shear, small, so you hold the fruit up and cut out some of the fruit to let the others get larger.
Well, you mean you go to one bunch, say, and cut out some of an individual bunch?
Yes.
So the others could get big?
Yes.
What a delicate job.
It is, because the fruit bruises easily. And
Sure.
it's time consuming, and especially in hot weather. It's also darn hot under that glass.
Sure it is. Well, now, do the leaves just cover the whole inside of the greenhouse?
They were grown, stood off from the glass about 18 inches. And, of course, after the fruit began to ripen, you would thin out the grass or the growth to allow the sun to get to the fruit, to bring the sugar up.
Were you generally pretty successful with them?
Yes, our biggest problem was you'd have to watch, especially when you're getting the sugar up. You don't water the grapes; you let them stay dry, and that's when you had to watch for red spider in the grapes. And of course, you couldn't use insecticides because it's a table grape.
Yeah.
And so you'd have to say a few prayers and just go in and fog it to keep the spider population down.
Well, I guess they were generally having a problem with it.
Well, we had a man. I had a man and a girl in the greenhouse there all the time.
Picking them off?
Working
By
on the
hand?
grapes, yeah.
That
Thinning them out, keeping the
job.
foliage down, and keeping it generally clean.
And so you would have grapes every day as long as the season lasted for the house.
July to Thanksgiving.
Was this something that other states did too? Was it common to raise grapes?
At one time, with the passing of Van Buren Estate, I don't believe they have any graperies there anymore. And Mrs. Robert R. Young had one. But at one time, the Twomley Estate, and the Goleta Estate, as I say, Mrs. Widener, quite a number of them had their own graperies.
Things are not what they used to be, are they?
Well, after Mrs. Ingersoll died, for a year we maintained the property, and I sold the grapes, but didn't have too many customers because we got $6 a pound.
Well, that was a little expensive, but well worth them, I'm sure.
Well, with labor as it is there, you don't get the $85 a month man anymore. Makes your food expensive.
Yes, indeed.
And also, today, the price of fuel oil. In the old days, when my father's greenhouses there, everything was coal, and coal was like $9 a ton. And I don't know what coal is today, but I'm sure it must be keeping the prices up.
You can be sure it's keeping up there. But the greenhouses on Coggeshall were not heated by coal, were they?
No, oil.
Oil. And how did you manage that? Were there oil tanks on the side, or
Yes, there were the regular 275-gallon household tanks. There were two of those in the cellar, and a 1,000-gallon tank outside that was buried.
Oh, I see. Now, when you say in the cellar.
In the cellar of the potting shed.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, that one must have been a pretty big building, too, was it?
Not really big, maybe 30 by 40, something like that.
I never thought about the heating of those things. I just assumed the sun did it.
No.
No, it wouldn't, of course.
Unfortunately. No, we had the heating. Everything was zoned, of course, and thermostatly controlled to maintain the heat. Because you'd have to shove the heat up on foggy, damp days to keep the mildew out. And all that sort of thing.
Yes, that must have been a problem.
Yeah.
Seems to me, I guess Jennifer Tinges told me that there had been an article in the Providence Journal about you some time ago. What is that?
I don't know where. I suppose my wife has it somewhere. I was interviewed one time at the New York Times director. There was an article in there on that.
Was that when you were still at the working at Bois Doré, or?
Yes. Yes.
And they just talked about
both times.
Oh, two times.
At the New York Times and Providence Journal went down too.
Talking about your job and
flower. Well, about gardening of the estates in general. My contemporaries, I guess you call them.
Yes. Well, as I said, I was told that you're the Dean of Gardeners, and so you must have had a wide acquaintance among the other gardeners in Newport.
Well, I don't think I was ever the Dean of Gardeners,
well,
but yes, I, as I say, belonged to the Horticultural Society and was very active. And at two different times, I was the president of the Newport Horticultural Society. And we had a very active group at that time.
Well, where did you meet?
Well, we used to meet up in the old music hall on Thames Street at one time, and then the two times that I was president, we used to meet in the hall. I think it was owned by Town Friday, the old firehouse on Quality Place up there. Well, the firehouse is still there, but I don't know. It was upstairs in a big hall over the fire station. In back of, Parati's drugstore is on the corner.
Oh, sure.
Quality Park, yeah. That's since changed hands, but right immediately in back of that was the fire station. We met up there for a good number of years.
Once a month, or what?
Yes, once a month.
What would you talk about? Your problems, or?
Yeah, just about everything, and the different gardeners would bring in sweet peas or a plant or something else, and you'd judge it and get a committee to judge it and make a recommendation. And in those days, we sponsored the Newport Home Garden, and people would sign up. And I think to register would cost something like 25 cents. And then in July, we'd go around Newport and Middletown, Portsmouth, and as far away as Tiverton, and judge the gardens. And people were awarded certificates. It was we call them home gardens, but some people would have flowers and vegetables growing in the same plot, and others would just have flowers, and others would just have vegetable gardens. So it was interesting to go around. And the home garden, I don't know why they didn't keep it up, because I thought it was very interesting.
A lot of people do have their own gardens these days. It's too bad it isn't still organized in that way. It would be so helpful.
Well, you'd find some pretty gardens, delightful gardens, in the darndest places. You know, you'd get a house on Thames Street when you couldn't get a cat between the houses, and somebody in the backyard would have a beautiful grapery or a vegetable garden or flower garden, things like that. Very interesting.
Sure.
Of course, it was all kinds of people, and we sponsored the home garden, and we sponsored the amateur flower show in the Aquidneck Hut. And
oh, you mean up at the park?
Yeah. And, you know, little girls would bring in their displays and things, and you had to give them a lot of attention and help and
sure. And
keep their interest up. And I know we'd give money prizes, and it would be like $1 or I think the most, maybe $5. And John Kesson was the treasurer, and I think some people might have framed the check and never cashed it.
Is that so? You can't blame them. Well, if people would come to you with problems, would they? If they didn't, something was going wrong with the plant, would they ask you what to do about it?
Yes, quite often somebody would bring in a plant and ask you what was wrong with it and what was causing it. And even among ourselves, we talk over, I've got something I can't get into bloom, and somebody would say, oh, I had that, and this is what I did. There's no secrets among the gardeners.
No.
Jealousy, but if you want to know anything, you could always go and ask them, and they'd help you. Any of them.
Real fraternity.
Yes.
Yeah. How many gardeners do you think there were in the heyday? Well, before the crash, say.
I don't know, but gee, down on Wakehurst alone, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 10 between just between Narragansett and Shepherd Avenue.
Well, there must have been hundreds of them.
Well, I would say there would be easily 50. And then, of course, the working outside, I mean 50 head gardeners, and outside that, you'd have easily 200 or 300 more working on the grounds.
Incredible. Certainly provided a lot of employment in those days, didn't it?
It did. I don't know whether it's an area you'd like to go back over, because most of the work, except for the head gardeners and the places that had glass, was seasonal employment. And a man, if he was raising a family, would work all summer to buy enough coal to put in his house for the winter. And in those days, there was no unemployment compensation, and also no health insurance and things like that. So a man worked all summer, as I say, to keep coal all winter.
Yeah, and then I suppose he tried to get another job in the wintertime.
There wasn't too much winter employment as I remember. I mean, unless, of course, the torpedo station in those days was going strong, and
the Fall River Line.
Factory, the Fall River Line.
But if a man wanted to be just a gardener, it really wasn't a very good way to make a living, unless he were one of the top.
Not until you got to the top.
Yeah. Did you find many young people going into it to make it a career?
Yes, occasionally some people like myself would start in, and then they'd go to lectures over WRI or seminars, as they call them, and things like that. But and some would stay with it. Even today, there still are. But you're finding quite a number of women today into it.
That's so.
More so than, let's say, 20 years ago.
Well, I guess that's across the board, pretty much, in a lot of occupations.
Yeah.
How long did your Horticultural Society in Newport last?
The Newport Horticultural Society is still going on. strong as ever.
Well, your own little organization I'm talking
Oh, the
about.
professional gardener.
Yes.
I would say it was 46, 47 when we joined the national branch of the professional gardeners, and we stayed with it. Professional Gardeners of America broke up and joined with the groundskeepers, and I forget what the name of it is now, but at one time we were just gardeners, and then they took in the greenskeepers and the I guess you call them apartment house managers that also manage the little grass or the arboretums they have around them, and so it spread, and we broke away from that at that time and formed the New England Professional Gardeners, and we worked with the gardeners on the Cape and the Boston area, and well, it's still going on today, but in a minor way, and as for professional gardeners, we derived our money by going in the Boston Flower Show, and we were paid to go in by the square footage. And then they set the theme of the show, and then you draw lots to find out how big a space you're going to have, and then you design your gardens accordingly. And we'd go up, hire the vans, and get everything together. All of us worked without pay, and the money just went to the treasury, and we had money enough for banquets. We gave 2 scholarships of dollars for scholars from Newport.
Oh, really?
And things like that.
Yeah.
So we had a fairly healthy treasury, and as I say, everybody worked and contributed. And most of the time, when we put an exhibit up in Boston, for instance, some people would come around and buy the material when the show was over.
So you made more money.
So you made a little money that way.
Must have been quite a job to put an exhibit together.
It's a lot of work, but it's
You say you have quite a few men working together. Would they be other gardeners from other estates?
yes.
You all work together that way?
Yes.
Must have taken days to do that.
No, we'd go to Boston. We'd leave Newport about 4 in the morning, and try to put it all up in one day.
You'd have to, I guess.
And well, because of the distance, in the case of say if we were using stone or something like that, we'd arrange for someone near Boston to have it delivered to the site, so it would be there when we got there. And we'd, like for instance, if we were making a summer house or gazebo or something like that, it would be made here and then taken apart and transported and put back. So that when we got there, all we had to was
Put it together.
put the sawdust and the peat and put everything in place.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the planning too, you see. Now, who would design your exhibit?
Generally, one of the group would design.
You select someone to do the design?
Yeah, like I myself, in the early days, had designed a garden, and then show it to the rest of the group, and if there's criticism, we'd jockey it around till we got, so something we all agreed upon, and know what we'd do when we got there.
Sure.
And several times. We had Ray Thayer, who's a professional landscape architect, design it. And this last show, I forget his name there, but he's a professional graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design too, and landscape design, and he designed that thing. So generally, one of the group will design it, and we'll pick it apart and decide on or change material. This material has to be compatible for the season, you know.
Of course.
And some of the worst critics are some of the little old ladies with their pencil that don't know the names of everything and when it blooms.
When the exhibit was put together there, was that called the Newport exhibit, or what did you name it?
Yes, Newport.
The Newport exhibit. Mm-hmm.
No names are put on an exhibit until after the judging. And then when you go through the Boston show, say, you'll see, say Newport Professional Gardener, say. But that's so the judges won't know who the judge is. Sometimes you know by just the material they use, whose exhibit it is, but another time you wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your career as a gardener, and I know a lot of other things, but particularly in gardening, did you ever go to any other parts of the country or abroad to look at gardens?
I try to, when I ever go anywhere, to look and see what someone else is doing, how they're doing it. Yes, especially down through the south and there.
You've been down there too.
Some interesting things like if you've ever followed the Azalea Trail.
I've heard about it.
It's very interesting.
I'm sure.
Very
It must be beautiful. Did you ever go out to California and look around there?
No, I've never been on the West Coast, but truly Mexico and Arizona and things like that, but there's nothing out there that ever impressed me.
No, well, there's not too much growing out there, is there? Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell me about your gardening and work at Bois Doré that I've overlooked or haven't thought of?
No, I think we've covered the subject.
Well, I'm sure we haven't, but
it was interesting and rewarding part of my life that I'd like to do over again. I don't. Some people have a job and they say they'd never do it over again.
Yes.
But I would.
That's a great feeling, isn't it?
I have a little greenhouse outside my house here, and I play, just to see something grow. I have a few walkers down there, and I take cuttings. I raise and buy some seed and take it across. My daughter plants it.
What does she grow, vegetables or flowers?
Both vegetables and flowers. Home garden. She's quite proud of the strawberries over there. She brought me a handful the other night.
Oh, nice. Do both your children like gardening too?
Yes, my son still does it. Even though he's an office worker now, he's still.
Well, that's a great relaxation. Sure. Well, when you retired, I know you didn't just stop working. You still do a lot of things. Someone told me that you were on the Park Commission.
That was a long time ago, the old Park Commission.
Oh?
Yes, I was on that for quite a few years.
What were those duties? What did you do on that?
Well, that was before we had the city manager form of government here in Newport. And we had a park commission. I think there were about 5 of us. and the secretary, and we took care of all the parks in the city of Newport. I had the contract with the city did the work. It was a non-paying job, but very interesting job. And
were you appointed or elected?
you're appointed by the mayor, and for a term, a rotating term.
Was there a limit to your the length of years, number of years you could serve? Or could you
No,
be
I
elected every
think
one?
once you got on it, you stayed till you died.
I see. Well, when the city manager form of government came in, then that park commission no longer existed.
The first thing I think Mr. Gilday did was fire us all and put the parks under the form of the street commissioner. And that's why you don't have any parks in the city of Newport to do with anything. Newport, Morton Park down here, for instance, there was a shrubbery border and a rest house, pathway through it, flagpole up there, and a man to maintain the park all summer long, see that vandalism was kept down. Now, you don't have even a fence around it. They knocked the rest station down, no one to take care of it, and they run through there with gang tractors, and it looks like they run through it with a gang tractor.
That's a shame.
And even the Quality Park up there in Broadway is nothing.
Well, it seems like a bad move. I suppose it was for economy's sake.
Well, I don't know. Seems to me the city council can find money to spend here and there, but they don't look at the aesthetics, they should.
There are a lot of parks in Newport, but they could use some maintenance, couldn't they?
Well, I think they could all use maintenance. The professional gardeners for a couple of years planted around the Soldiers and Sailors Monument and things like that up there, and I don't know if it was appreciated or not.
Well, I'm sure it was, but probably taken for granted.
But in that little park on Eisenhower Park, they maintain that too.
That's a very important park, being right where it is. It ought to look nice.
Well, it gets a lot of care, but I think we could do with the park department now, as opposed to the recreation department. The park commission had nothing to do with recreation, and that was a separate commission.
Well, do you ever think of proposing that there be another park commission?
Doesn't get very high
No, I suppose.
credence from a city manager.
Well, somebody ought to bring it up, I guess. But since you've been retired now, or maybe even before, you say you were superintendent of the Board of Canvassers, or chairman, or what is the title?
Chairman of the board.
Chairman of the Board of Canvassers. How long have you been doing that?
18 years.
Oh, well, you've been on that a long time, too. Well, you told me you meet twice a week, and I was surprised. You say it's a lot of paperwork, but what can you give me any idea of the sort of job you do as the chairman?
Well, actually, it is not a lot of hard work. It's an awful lot of work as far as the guilds are concerned, because the Board of Canvassers, the State Board of Canvassers, I think they interpret the rules. They make a new rule every day and give you 10 different interpretations of it. And
I know they changed all the forms recently.
oh, yeah. And then the guilds have to do the work, and it's mostly more work for the guilds than it would be for members of the board. So they're forever updating the voting list and changing names and people's residences and registering new voters. And, Newport has quite a floating population. People change their residence quite often. And when they move to another location, and you have to notify the board there that you have John Doe registered here now, and so we won't be registered in two places and things like that. So it's mostly the bulk of the work is for the office staff.
Yes.
And
But when it comes up to election time, do you have to see that all the polling places are ready?
yes, we hire a contractor to go around and set up the tables and the signs where to vote, what district you're in. For instance, tomorrow I'll open the office at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the police come and take the bags and the books to the polling places, and the officer stays there. Has to be an officer there all day long, as long as the polls are open.
I just want to say for this tape that that's for the special
Yes,
election for the
special
referendum
election. Yes,
on the greenhouse
so,
compact.
greenhouse. Mm-hmm. And being a special election, I don't expect it to be a very large turnout. It surprised me if it is. People just don't come out for it. And the board is supposed to be in session all day long while the polls are open. And so it makes a rather boring day to sit around reading the daily news of Providence Journal.
Where do you go now? Where will you be sitting during that time?
In the office, the City Hall.
Oh, you'll be in the office itself.
Well, after the polls are open, we'll go around and inspect them, make sure that everything is set up right, and that supplies are there for the helping that every one of the workers showed up as they should, or try to someone gets sick at the last minute to replace that person, and then we just sit there until the polls close and the returns come in, and we count the returns, and then everybody in Newport will know what the score is before we do, because as the polls close, the workers come in at different times. And for instance, any candidate that wanted to know, he'd have his own runners at the polls to take the tallies back, and we wouldn't know that, and we don't have runners, so we got to wait till we open the books and count the scores and tally them up and the results.
And when you get all the results together from all of the polling places, do you call the state offices and tell them the numbers?
Well, the state sends down a mechanic who's in the office with us all day while things open. He's there to fix anything that goes wrong, and he takes the tallies back to Providence, to the state board. And he will, otherwise it would be up to us to see that it gets there. Sometimes we call on the police or the state police to deliver it. And lately, the mechanic will stop by and pick up, say, the Middletown ballots and the Portsmouth ballots on his way to Providence.
Have you been active in any other community activities that you haven't mentioned? You've done an awful lot.
Well, no, not really.
Those took a lot of time.
With the local gardeners and border canvases, it's about the extent of music.
And now that you have more time, too, are you getting involved in Does your own little garden take a lot of your time?
No, I have my grandson mow it.
You're really taking it easy. Huh? Do you and your wife take little trips now that she has time too?
We haven't lately, but because I don't like driving, she won't fly.
Oh dear.
But, we used to go to Florida every winter for a few weeks at least, but we haven't in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I flew down with my daughter a couple of times, but not with my wife. She wouldn't get aboard the plane.
A lot of people feel that way. Well, do you want to tell me what you think about city and state politics, Newport City politics?
Well, as you know, I'm a Republican, appointed to the Canvassing Authority by the Republican, and a registered Republican. But I do think that the state needs a change, and I will say that I voted for the city manager form of government, but if I have a chance again, I'll certainly vote it out. I don't think the city manager form of government is the best thing that ever happened.
You don't think it's working?
It's working, but I think it's too expensive.
Oh. Well, do you think it's kept the city a little cleaner? Politically?
No.
No?
No, here in Newport, we're supposed to be nonpartisan, but I don't think it's changed one thing, because the state is partisan elections, and so is the country. So we're a little island onto ourselves here. And, no, I don't think it's kept anything cleaner.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you feel about living in Newport generally? Have you been happy here? You're glad you live here?
I never found any place that I like better. I remember when my children were small, we used to have to take our vacations in the summertime when they were out of school. And one year we took a cottage up in New Hampshire. And on the lake, nice, but I said to my wife, I don't know why anybody would want to leave Newport in the summertime to come up here.
It's true, it's a place to be in the summertime. Mm-hmm. So you've been quite content here. Anything else you'd like to say before we stop?
No, I think I've about run out of things to say.
All right, we'll quit then. We'll continue our interview on June the 19th, 1984, and I'd like to ask you some further questions about Newport. First of all, about the summer colony people who lived on the estates. Were you aware of any changes that took place in their lifestyle when times began to get harder?
Not really. Some of them, I remember working, when I was working for Mrs. Fonstock, under George W. Kipp, that they had, previously, we had always, Mr. Kipp had already dealt with a New York office, and when the Depression came, they put it under the direction of an efficiency expert, and they were supposed to save money for the operation of the place.
What would the efficiency expert do?
Well, he cut down on labor, and he cut down on purchases of fertilizers and things like that, and generally watched the store so that it didn't walk out on him.
Did he come around and actually supervise?
Yes, he came around at least twice a month. And I can't remember his name or what he was from, but he handled everything, all bills, all purchases, everything had to go through the efficiency people.
How did the staff react to that?
Well, not too kindly, I guess, but like everything else, you just accepted it.
Mm-hmm. Did the other people working on other estates have similar things happen to them?
Some, not many. Some cut back on labor, but it seems, as I recall, that it was a brief period where they cut back and then found out that they wanted a few luxuries and then went and had them anyway.
Oh. Was this around 1929 when the crash happened? Or?
Yes, in the 30s, early 30s. Yes.
Well, this must have affected some of the Newport residents, of course. Did they find other jobs?
Well, actually, growing up on this private estate, we didn't really feel the depression because in my father's position, I was my brothers growing up, but a house and light and heat and telephone, everything was provided. So, and they didn't cut back on the wages. They were, Lord knows they were bare minimum anyway. But we didn't feel it as much as a factory worker did.
Mm-hmm. So your family was really not affected much by the changes in the summer colony. Well, you were speaking of the Depression. When did you first feel anything about the Depression? You must have had some awareness of it, even though you were comparatively well off.
Well, only almost aware, of course, but as it didn't directly affect me as a boy growing up. In those days, I wasn't a wage earner, so almost as if it didn't affect me at all.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice any certain sections of the city that seemed to be troubled by it, especially?
Not in Newport. Perhaps in the larger cities they were affected, but Newport in those days was Navy and, of course, the torpedo station. And Newport, I would say, was a little island into itself. We weren't affected to that extent. Of course, prices of food and things like that, of course, was affected. But, and I remember probably cigarettes were 15 cents a package. What are they now, $1.10 or whatever?
Way beyond that. Do you remember the Civic Employment Association?
No.
Means nothing to you.
No.
Were you aware of any of the federal government policies like the New Deal that helped people here?
Yes, aware of them, but as I say, Newport wasn't really that hard hit because of the torpedo station. I do remember a layoff, and some of the men came to work for my father during the Depression, and they probably only lasted a few months or maybe a couple of years, and then when the torpedo station opened up again and they went back to work.
Well, the torpedo station closed?
It closed down.
It did.
Didn't close. It cut back.
Mm. That must have affected a lot of people. That was a big employer.
Yes, I remember there were 3 men that worked at the station and then went back there. Evan Mulroney went back, and McGraw and Murphy. I can't remember them all, but I know they just took seasonal work to tie them over for a bit and then went back to the station.
That was when the war seemed to be coming, I guess.
I can't put a date to it.
Well, so when Depression sort of began to end, you weren't too much aware of any change because it never had been so noticeable in the first place.
No.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Fall River line. Did you travel on it?
Yes. As a young lad, we'd go down and watch them load fish every night. Not every night, but they loaded fish every night. We'd go down there and watch them load fish. And
where was that? Which wharf?
The end of Long Wharf.
Long Wharf.
Right at the very end of Long Wharf. And then I traveled to New York on the line to go to the flower shows.
Oh.
And I remember on the Fall River line there was the purser would bring out a carpet and these horses, and you'd roll the dice, and you'd pay 25 cents to bet on your horse.
Just like an ocean liner.
And that would go on for a couple of hours, and you'd roll this carpet up and put it away. I also remember coming back one time. We went to New York to a flower show again. We always stayed at the Lexington Hotel because the flower show was on Lexington Avenue. Central Palace, I think, or something like that. And I remember coming back. It took us 23 hours from New York to get to Newport because of a storm, and they anchored off Fisher's Island. And of course, they had to feed us a breakfast.
Oh, that was an adventure.
23 hours.
Did you have a stateroom?
Yes,
yes. So you could sleep?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, how was the food?
Well, as near as I can recall, it was pretty good. I don't really know.
Well, a lot of people have said that the food was excellent on the Fall River line, but you don't remember especially.
No, we'd leave New York, as near as I can recall, we'd leave Newport about 9 o'clock in the evening and get to New York around 7 in the morning or somewhere in that time. Mm-hmm. And,
well, would you eat dinner on the boat, or was it too late for dinner?
No, we never ate going down. Coming back, we would. Mm-hmm. But generally in those days, we'd eat before we got on the boat.
Mm-hmm. Was there any music on the boat?
Yes, there was music on the boat, and my father, or if I went with Mr. Burroughs, we always had a stateroom, and you'd get a few hours sleep before getting to New York.
Mm-hmm. Who was Mr. Burroughs?
He was the superintendent gardener for Mrs. Harold Brown.
Well, was there an orchestra on the boat?
Yes, it seems to me there was an orchestra there. Yeah. I was really too too young to do any dancing or anything like that, but I remember going down.
Oh, and they danced too.
Hmm?
They danced also.
Yes.
Oh. Well, when you were taking these trips, was this in the 30s or 20s?
Yes, in the 30s.
Do you remember any special boats?
34, 35. It seems to me that the name Priscilla comes to me, but maybe.
Well, there was a Priscilla, but no one particular one impressed you very much. Did you say you had no friends who worked on the line? So that when it went out of business, you didn't see any direct effects on people you knew?
No, it was a few people who had been working in the shops and things were friends of my father, but not to me personally.
Mm-hmm. So you had no feeling particularly about what happened when it went out of business?
No.
Did you see any general feeling of effects along the Long Wharf and the point where some of the shops were? Did you ever get out there and look at those areas?
No, that was on the other end of town.
Well, did many tourists come to Newport on the Fall River line?
Yes, quite a number of day trippers would come down.
Were you aware of them?
Just in the fact that you'd see them coming and getting off the boat while you were watching.
Mm-hmm. Did the residents feel that the tourists were taking over the town, or did they have any feelings about them in those days?
No, I think they only had a respect quite different from today. The natives of today are rather hostile to the tourists, but not so in those days.
Mm-hmm. Where did they stay when they came here?
Well, there were several hotels and quite a number of rooming houses that they'd stay in. And I remember the traveling salesmen that would come to visit my father, they generally stayed in the rooming houses because they were, of course, cheaper, and I suppose they were on a tight budget, so they didn't go for the more luxurious appointments.
Mm-hmm. Were they boarding houses too? Did they serve meals?
I don't recall too many serving meals. Yes, there were, but I couldn't name them.
But there were several restaurants too, I suppose.
Oh, plenty of restaurants, yes.
Even in those days?
Yeah, yes.
What did people do when they came here as tourists?
Well, one of the things, there were guides. I remember that they had a little badge, and they stood up on Turo Street or Turo Park, and the cabs would come along and pick up a guide, and he would go around the Ocean Drive, which was a big thing, it still is, but the guide would narrate little dialogue, whatever he had, the names of the people who occupied the estates then. And or there were horse-drawn carriages up there at the park too, and you could drive around in carriages.
I think so. Well, what about the beaches? Did they come to go to the beaches too?
Yes, there were trolley cars from Commercial Wharf, where some of the lines docked right down to Newport Beach. In the summertime, I remember sitting in wicker chairs type of benches with There's no sides on it.
Mm-hmm.
Going down to the beach.
Were there a lot more entertainment things on the beaches in those days than now?
Oh yes, there was quite a number of concessions there, and that wiped out during the hurricanes. It came back briefly, but it never came back to what it was. Just about everything. There were, I think there were Japanese and pulled strings and prizes and everything, arcades and.
So a little carnival?
It just, yes, it was a carnival atmosphere at least.
A very popular place, I imagine.
Yes, it was a wide boardwalk down the whole length of the beach.
Really?
And an auditorium that had dances. The firemen would give a ball to raise money for the retirement fund, and the police had a ball, and the Horticultural Society had a ball. And these were quite big. I mean, you'd get 500 people to a dance.
It's hard to imagine.
I don't think you can get 50 today.
No. Why was it not rebuilt, do you think?
Well, I don't know. It was built after the 38 hurricane, but never after it was either 44 or that was the death knell. It never came back after that.
Well, speaking of the hurricane, well, no, I'll skip that for the moment. I want to ask you about prohibition. How old were you when the 18th Amendment was passed in 1919? You weren't even alive.
Yes,
Were
but I was only 2 years old. I don't
Sorry,
remember
you don't
too
have
much
too
about
many
that.
memories about prohibition. Did you hear your father or your family talking about it at all?
Well, my uncle owned a bar, and the Navy came in, I think, in 1918, and just prior to the war, and they closed up Newport. They couldn't close all the bars in Newport. The rest of the state was still, prohibition was still another year away for them, but Newport was closed up. And my uncle sold out, and but the story goes around that Newport was closed up, but some wag said that there's only two places you couldn't get a drink now, the bank and the post office.
Well, the Navy had that much power. They could close all the bars in Newport?
They did.
For civilians
They
and
did.
everyone?
Yeah, just
officially.
prior to prohibition. It was just about a year told.
How did the residents feel about that?
Well, I guess they made their own brew. I don't know.
It just started a little earlier. Well, did you hear any stories about the smuggling that went on during that time?
Yes, there was a lot of that coming in down to the beaches, all along the beaches. There were smugglers. We used to go down. There was down the wharf there. There was a ship named the Black Duck, which was reportedly the fastest boat around.
Who owned that?
I don't know.
Oh.
It was one of the things that the Coast Guard couldn't keep up with.
Did you have any opinion about whether the local police tried to enforce the smuggling laws?
Oh, I guess they did. Some cases, I'm sure they looked the other way, but I think in general, yes, they did their job.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I did hear a story about at least one boat being wrecked off the coast and the liquor washing ashore, and people were running out to gather it up. How did the police do about that, you know?
No, I remember. I remember down to Belmont's Beach, the liquor was in sacks, in burlap sacks, and I remember people going down and diving in the water with their clothes on to get to these sacks.
And they didn't have any trouble bringing it in and taking it home?
No, I don't think there was too much. I don't think the police bothered too much on that.
Mm-hmm.
It was generally left up to the Coast Guard to enforce the stuff like that. As I say, the local police would close up any suspected bar or things like that, but as a rule, they didn't bother too many people.
Well, there were speakeasies in Newport then.
Quite a few.
There were. Were they scattered around in certain areas, you know?
Oh, well, like I said, every place with a bank and a post office.
Did you know people who went to them, even though you were so young?
Oh, yes. Some of the fellows that worked for my father, they pool their resources and send somebody for a pint.
Oh, they managed to. Did you know anybody, or did your family know anybody who made home brew?
No. There was no drinking it in my house, and well, there was a bottle of wine or something there, but my mother didn't drink, and my father rarely. So
no.
actually, we weren't a drinking family.
Yeah, well, you didn't have any friends who had their bathtubs.
Oh yeah, somebody always had a bottle of beer around, and you'd go to. As I say, I didn't participate because I was just a little kid, so.
Sure.
But go visit a potting shed. Always had a bottle hidden somewhere.
Well, when towards the end of Prohibition, the gangsters really got into it. Did you notice any effects in Newport when it got to be a real criminal thing?
No, I can't say that I was aware of that.
Well, when the Prohibition ended in 1933, did you notice any immediate changes in the liquor business?
Well, they just took the shutters off what was already there.
There was no hiatus in any way. Well, now we'll come to the hurricane of 1938. You were here in Newport when that happened, were you?
Yes.
Where were you?
Working for Mrs. Farnsworth for George W. Kipp.
Uh-huh. Did you know it was coming?
No, we just thought it was another line storm. We sat there and watched the trees topple over, and it was quite. I've never seen that. I've been through a few hurricanes, but that was the worst I've ever seen.
You had seen that?
We had one in '44. I know I was still in the Army and just back from Europe. We had one, but a few trees went over, but nothing like 38. 38 was devastating.
Yeah, so that's 100 years hurricane, as they call it. Did you notice the barometer going down the way a lot of people did?
No, I was working in 38, as I say, with Mr. Kipp, and the rains came, and the standing in the shed, and couldn't work out, and the winds came up, and that was, I think it was about between 3 and 4 in the afternoon when it hit the hardest. Mm-hmm. And by 6 o'clock it was all over, but by then the trees were down, the lines were down, there was no telephone or communications.
Do you remember how the wind sounded?
Like a low moan when it started. But there was no tornado type. It was just a high winds and driving rains, and I say like a low moan to the. It seemed in the afternoon it got awful still, and then it came back again, like in 2 phases. Mm-hmm.
Well, what did you do? You say you were in the shed. Did you stay in there the whole time?
Well, when it started to rain, I was working with Ellen, and we just put our tools away and went in the shed and waited for the boss to come around to give us something else to do. And during the rain, we just stood there and watched them. When the trees started to go down, I remember one huge elm that went down. It would go so far, and then it would come back, and it would go, and each time it was like earth shaking. And then when it finally did go over, it took, I guess the ball was 12, 15 feet. Took ripped enough of the roots eventually broke so it could tip over. It went down.
Did you lose many other trees too?
Oh, I'd hesitate to say how many, but without exaggerating, just on Mrs. Farnstock's place, I think we lost about 30 trees.
Must have made you feel very bad to see those beautiful trees cut in.
And where my father was on Van Allen's, that was about the same thing. Mm-hmm. And then there were trees, chestnut trees, all down Webster Street, and they were just broken and ripped apart there.
Were the buildings hurt as well?
Not too many of the shingles, of course, but roof. But of course, the Bailey's Beach, and they just went with the tide. They ended up somewhere in the Yalmy Pond there. And shore properties got most of the brunt.
When it was all over, what did you go out and walk around? Did you want to see how things looked?
Yes, looked around, couldn't do much, and the utility people were coming around and shutting off the electricity because damn the fire and things like that.
How did it generally look to you? Was it very greatly changed?
It made a lasting impression. I mean, in the number of trees down in, and when you see some of the pictures in the paper of tornadoes in the West, it wasn't that type of destruction. It was mostly trees and a porch roof here or skylight missing. But as I say, the beaches were just washed away. Bathhouses and concessions and everything else were just gone.
But you just stayed put where you were. You didn't, during the storm, you didn't try to go out and adventure around.
No, but we weren't afraid. We just thought it was another line storm.
You weren't afraid when you saw all those trees coming?
No,
Well, then how did the rebuilding go on? What did you do first to start clearing away?
Well, the first thing was to open up the roads, and in '38 there were no chainsaws, just 2 men saw, and you cut and pull the branches and limbs aside so traffic could get through, and then after you opened up the way, then they went back over and cut them up and burned it. Mostly you would burn the wood and haul the stumps away.
Well, did you start cutting up the trees on the property you were working on? Where were you working?
Yes, that was the first year that I worked all winter. A man named John Russo, and I was on the other end of the saw, and he was on one end, I on the other, and we worked all winter just cutting and stacking wood.
Just at Bois Doré?
Just,
yeah. Were there many other people clearing away the trees too?
Just about everybody in town was doing the same thing.
Did people come from out of town to work too?
Yes, in those days we got a lot of people coming from Fall River. Day workers.
Would you say the city was affected in any way permanently by that hurricane?
Well, it's always a great loss when you lose trees of that size, but permanently, no. Way changes. The beaches were changed. Erosion on the Ocean Drive. They were privately owned fishing shacks over there, and of course they were gone. And after the Ocean Drive never came back, it was just washed away. I remember those.
What areas would that be that were washed away?
Well, from the I guess Price's Neck, I would say, from Price's Neck around to where the Coast Guard station is today. That was the most hard hit, and the fishing, they call them fishing camps around there, and they were, of course, just wiped out, and stretches of the land. Today, if you go around, you just see bare rock, but then it was covered with soil and had trees and things growing on it.
That's what a difference that must have made. Well, how do you feel about hurricanes? If another one is predicted, what do you think he'll do?
Well, I think at my age I'm going to sit in the house and watch it. I'm certainly not going to go down to the shore to watch the tides or the surf.
In this location, you should be plenty far away from any
water.
water.
I'm sure I am.
Okay, well, now we come to World War II and the torpedo station. Now you say you went into the service during the war. What year was that?
41, I believe.
Just about when war was declared?
Yes, 41. Like 41. I went to Fort Devens, and from there to Florida, courtesy of Uncle Sam. This was August. Very good. And then I went to school, Denver, Colorado.
Were you in the Army or what
Yeah,
branch?
Air Force.
Air Force.
Army Air Force. And from Colorado back to Virginia it's sent to Benghazi, the desert. Rommel was running around the desert then.
Well, now, what sort of job did you do in the Air Force?
Armament school. Mostly power turrets and gun sights.
You weren't in a tank.
No. In the B-24s.
Well, you flew.
Heavy bombers.
You flew in the bomb.
I didn't fly that much. No, I was in the ground crew. We flew to just test them back in. We were under British command in the desert. The 9th Bomber Command under British control. And then they were bombing the Ploesti oil fields. And we moved from the desert when Rommel finally got out of the Middle East. We went to Italy. We were under American 376 then. And
what part of the war was that?
well, it was on the boot of Italy down on the Mediterranean.
You weren't part of that Monte Cassino or something?
No, we're still in the B-24s. And then we stayed at a place called San Pancrazio was our base, right in the middle of the wine country. And that wasn't too hard to take in.
You learned to appreciate wine.
After being in the desert, well, we couldn't get anything to drink.
What a contrast.
We went, when the war with Germany was over, I was sent back to school again. Sent back here, that was 1944. I came back here.
Where was that?
When I was sent back here, I was sent back to New Mexico.
More desert.
Well, a little better than Benghazi, but still desert. And then the war with Germany ended, and the war with Japan was winding down, and if you had service time, you could get out of the army to begin to. And I was a little over 3 years in the service, so I was out a little earlier than some of the other boys.
Mm-hmm.
That was September 1945. I got out of service, and that's when I went to hung around a little while. In November of 45, that's when I went to work at Bois Doré.
You came right back to Newport when you got through.
Yeah.
Well, then you don't have many memories of Newport during the war. Did you get to come back for a visit at all?
No.
Only
No. Once we hit the desert there, we were there for, did I say, 3 years, I guess, between there and Italy.
So you don't really know anything about how Newport was during the war when they were putting in the anti-aircraft installations and doing all the
Oh, well,
building.
yes, I know, because my mother would write and send photographs, and At Wakehurst, where my father was, they, because of the shortage of this and that, they bought cows and had chickens, and father had a man working for him named Potter, and he made the butter and the cheese and killed the chickens and everything else, and so they were relatively well off.
They certainly were. That rationing didn't bother them much, did it?
No.
Very unusual. Were your family worried about Newport being a target for attack?
No, I don't think so. I don't really think so. They seem to think that we were too far away from the war there. My brothers, the three of us, were in the service. My brother Howard was in England in the Air Force, and my brother Clifford was in the Seabees in the Aleutian Islands. So the three of us in the service at the same time.
We were scattered.
Yeah.
Well, while the war was on, did your mother or any of the other members of the family do any volunteer work, like for the Red Cross or the USO?
Oh yes, they worked that way, and then my mother was quite active in the Women's Relief Corps and things like that. And they sent packages and made up packages and things like that.
Well, you say your wife worked at the torpedo station during the war, didn't you say that?
Yes, yes.
Did she?
She worked for Commander Carr.
Well, that was when you were married towards the end of the war, I believe, weren't you?
Yeah, I made a mistake. When I got home from in 1944, before I went to New Mexico, and I was married then. I was still in uniform.
Did your wife like working over at the torpedo station? Did she say much about that?
Well, I guess she liked it. It was a rather decent job. She was a secretary. She had gone.
You say your wife was a secretary.
Yes, she had gone through Catherine Gibbs School and got the job with the civil service there and worked for a Commander Carr.
Did she have any feeling about the urgency of the work that was being done over there, and how important it was to the war?
Well, I'm sure they were briefed repeatedly about the urgency and the quality of the work that turned out. But I didn't hear too much about that.
Did your family say anything much about security measures they had to take? Did they have to put up blackout curtains or?
Yes, they blackout, and of course the price of animal feed went up, and my mother would write and tell me all about that.
Did they tell you anything about what happened here on VE Day and VJ Day?
No, just the jubilation, is that the word?
It's a good one. All right, we'll jump forward in time now to when the Navy fleet left Newport. Of course, you were living here then. Did you think that was good for the city or bad?
Well, we thought at the time, as did everyone, that it was bad for Newport. However, Newport rebounded, and I think today the Navy is probably more important to Newport today than it ever was, because the torpedo station is gone, but the War College there and these think tanks are all around Middletown there, directly dependent on the Navy. And while we don't have the fleet standing out in the harbor, I think the payroll, the economy is much greater today than it ever was.
Mm-hmm. Well, right after the fleet left, did you notice any great changes in the city? Or did you see a lot of unemployment?
Yes and no. There was unemployment, of course, and a lot of the doomsayers. I thought it was the end of the world, and briefly, rents were cheaper, and most of the Navy-based people left Newport, perhaps back to their own hometown, wherever that may have been. And housing was a little more free, a little more available. But gradually, the prices of rent started going back up again, and hey, now they're out of this world.
Well, was it a surprise to people when the fleet left, or was it expected?
Well, of course, they were all happy that the war was over, but Newport, little island that it is, they were directly affected because of the pullout of the personnel.
Quite a few Navy people retire in Newport. Do you have any opinion about why they come here?
Well, I know that a lot of the elderly people retire in Newport, just like our climate here. We've got a pretty decent climate. We don't have extreme cold and extreme heat. And some of the people that I know, for instance, two families from Texas that think that there's nothing like the green grass and the ocean because they don't see any but whatever you see in Texas.
You're speaking to a Texan.
What part of Texas are you from?
I'll tell you later. Do you think that they like particular areas when they do come here?
I don't think there's any one area over another. I do think that the first ward, which is Washington Street out that way, there are quite a number of nice homes there out that way. But down here in the fourth ward, there's been an awful lot of building over in Chartier Circle, for instance, and they're new and more modern housing that you'd find in this section. But no, I think they're pretty evenly scattered around town, and also in Middletown. great number of new housing out in Middletown in the last 20 years.
Do you remember what Saturday night was like on Thames Street when the fleet was in town?
Oh yes, you just had to walk by the places and they were alive and jumping and the jukeboxes blaring.
What was down there? Were there a lot of restaurants or
Yes,
what else?
restaurants and bars. And that's about it.
Were there many tattoo parlors?
I only remember two. There might be more, but I think there's probably only two in town now.
All right, then I'll ask you next about the ferries and the Newport Bridge. The ferries, of course, ran for many, many years. Did you used to ride them very often?
Yes, quite often. It was the thing to do, take a ferry ride. Sometime in the summer evening, you just get on the ferry and go to Jamestown, don't get off, and come back just for the ride.
Cool off?
Yes.
Well, were the boats nice? Were they comfortable? Or other impressions?
No, I'd say they were comfortable and clean, and the restroom was kept clean, and probably a little notch above some of the other places because they changed the crews, when a man's hours were up there, he'd either lived in Jamestown or lived in Newport, and when he walked off, another man would take his place.
Were they big crews? What was the size of them?
I couldn't give you an answer there, but I would say roughly maybe 6. A couple of deckhands to open the gates and tie it up, and of course the engineer and probably his helper in the below deck, and the captain and one or two would be above deck. Maybe 6, probably 7.
Did all the boats carry cars?
Yes, between Newport and Jamestown.
Do you remember any particular boats?
No, I couldn't tell you. The Governor Carr and some of those other things, but I couldn't tell you.
There were some problems with the ferry system, I believe. Do you remember any of those maintenance problems or anything like that over from Jamestown?
No, I do remember coming into Newport about 11 o'clock, coming to Jamestown about 11 o'clock one night and just get to the dock when the ferry was pulling out, and the captain brought the boat back in again so I could get on.
Is that so? Did you know him?
No.
Oh.
They were probably just about 20 feet from the dock when I drove down there, and we were coming back from New York. And they pulled back in and let you get on.
Very nice. Well, a lot of people seem to feel that the ferry system was old and that it was too slow and wanted a bridge. Did you have a feeling about a bridge?
No, I didn't object to it, but I do think it has put Newport into because of this, put Newport into the high-speed lane. We get endless streams of traffic funneling into Newport now that we really can't handle it. Our streets are narrow, and it's just too much for Newport.
When the Jamestown Bridge was built, when was that built? 1940, I think. Did you foresee that there'd be another bridge connecting to Newport?
No, I didn't. I actually didn't. That was the West Passage there. And, of course, they talked about a bridge here, and they also talked about a bridge across the Sakonnet, but I don't think we'll see that.
Do you think, well, you said you thought it changed Newport a great deal, having that bridge there. Do you miss the ferries? Would you like to go back and have them here instead of the bridge?
Well, it's part of nostalgia, I guess. As a practical thing, I don't think they'll ever come back. But yes, I'd like to see him back there, but I don't think you'll ever see him again.
On the last day the ferries ran, some people got on them and rode back and forth.
Yes.
Did you do that?
No, I wasn't one of those.
Well, when you lived here many years in Newport, have you been aware over that time of the old houses going back to colonial days and what was happening to them when they were running down and before they were restored?
Well, yes, I think Newport owes a big debt to Doris Duke for buying up these old houses and refurbishing them to their original thing of the restoration work that she has done with her own money is astounding, and I don't believe too many people really appreciate what she has done. She's spent over $17 million just on buying up these, and some of them were little better than shacks. They were on their last legs, and the restoration work is literally done from top to bottom, and not just patchwork, real thorough job. As I say, the city of Newport owes her a big, deep debt of, I don't know if too many people really appreciate what she's done or not.
Well, but before Miss Duke started doing this, there were some other efforts at restoration. But were you aware of those houses before people did start to take an interest in them? Say back in the 50s, did you ever walk around and look at this old house and say, it's a shame that's falling down, or did you just take them for granted?
Yes, it was a shame to see them fall down. There seemed to be an era, like a pause over a span of years there, where people just didn't keep their property up, didn't paint or repair. And then when it did start to come back, I think people were a little more conscious about their homes and started to spend a little money on them and fix up. But just a span of maybe 10 years or so, where it seemed that people just let things go. Maybe it was during the war when they couldn't get a thing, and then immediately after the war they had to think about it. And it was just during that span of time that the Newport began to get a little shabby. But I think as a whole now, I can't say that there's any one neighborhood that's a blight. I think we're a fortunate community, I'd say, that has such decent homes.
It's changed just in a few years, I've read of that.
Yeah.
Of course, a lot of people were displaced from those houses that were restored down the Point section, for instance. How did you feel about seeing them put out? Did you think about what might happen to them?
Well, I think the sad part was there wasn't too many that were displaced, but some of those that were probably paying $35 and $40 a month rent, when they were displaced, they had to move into other quarters, and of course the rents have just been going up and up, and the housing project out Wanamatangi area there, the Autonomy Hill area, they absorbed a lot of them, but I don't know what the rents are out there, but there are no rents now. I don't think in Newport. They generally run, what, 200 or 400 a month, something like that.
Well, during the period when the restoration business was really beginning, did you ever go to any of the city council or planning board meetings to hear them talk about what they would do?
Yes, the council meetings attended. And,
did you think that was good planning?
I thought some of the planning board's ideas were good, and what they did, of course, it always hinges on the if we can get this money, if we can get that, and it seemed to me a lot of the thinking was on government grants, federal grants, and I didn't think too much of that type of thinking.
You thought they should have gotten their money locally?
I thought yes, I thought so.
You didn't believe in borrowing?
Well, it's not to borrow, but the government gives you an outright grant of $100,000, and you've got to match it, and the state has to match it, and our taxes just keep going up and up. And it seems to me that if we took our little $50,000 and didn't pay any attention to Uncle Sam and the state of Rhode Island, that maybe we'd been just as further advanced and kept our taxes in line.
Well, now I'd like to ask you about the America's Cup races. Were you much interested in those?
Yes.
Did you ever get involved in them?
And not to any extent. I went out to see a race, and I don't think I want to go again.
What's the earliest Cup series you can remember?
Oh, I remember Sopwith and Sir Thomas Lipton and those folks there. They were.
When was that? The 20s or 30s?
Oh, yes, in the 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Sir Thomas Lipton had the Shamrock 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess. That he was quite a challenger. He never won, but
he never won.
He never won. They were the old J-Boat series, I believe they call it.
The very tall man.
Yes.
What do you think the races did for Newport?
I think it put Newport on the map. It was literally billions of dollars of free publicity, and it went all around the world. The races were copied in every newspaper and television station, I think, in the world, and Newport couldn't possibly have that much notoriety, publicity, if it had to pay for it. It put Newport on the world map, and it did a lot for Rhode Island too. I'm sure wasn't appreciated by some people, but it was the word Newport came to mean the yachting center of the world.
Do you think it really had more good effects than bad effects?
Oh yes, I do. I'm sure it's because of that we have the tourism that we got today. I'm not against tourism per se, but the Preservation Society, lifeblood depends on tourism, and it's just that we seem to be getting more and more than some people bargain for.
When the boats were actually racing in Newport, all the people came to either be on them or to watch. Was your neighborhood over in the Wakehurst, the Bois Doré area affected? Did you see more people?
No, not really. Most of the people would come in, and in the wharf area, they would take the boats out. The harbor area was mostly affected. In our area, Bois Doré, it was just the sightseeing buses that would come by, but we didn't get the foot traffic. People, the day trippers, that the harbor area got.
Well, I was thinking about over in the Salve, Regina area, for the last race, the Australians took over one of the houses, and I understand that some of the neighbors were much aware of them. You didn't hear anything like that when you were in Bois Doré?
No, the Preservation Society, at least so Salve did, at least some of their places out. But no, I don't think they were a disturbing influence, because most of the crews were pretty well regimented. They had a schedule to adhere to, and to feed that house and feed the crews. The cooks and the chefs and the laundresses and everything else was affected, and that I think was a very good influence on Newport.
How do you think Newport felt, the residents felt about all kinds of people who came here for the races? Really diverse elements.
Diverse they were, but no, I think people as a whole welcomed them, and the challenge. Not too many were, say, close to the Swedes or the Italians or whatever, but the shopkeepers and the butcher and the baker, I'm sure, thrived on them.
Well, are you sorry the races have gone?
Well, yes, it's like a big star that we had over Newport. Suddenly somebody put the lights out.
Well, I think on that we'll end our little talk, Mr. Booth.